Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today. Steve, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
How you doing, brother?
Nice to see you. Nice to be here.
It's nice to have you down, mate. I know we kind of first met when you were baffling me with all the FP knowledge, and it was one of those conversations where you've been in the service for X number of years and you think you know a lot about your craft, and then you come into people like yourself who've been in for 30-something years, and the level of detail that was coming into things like training and development and all the textbooks we used to have to read. Do you see a massive discrepancy between people that are coming through the services now versus when you started? Because, I mean, you joined in 1987, didn't you?
Yeah, that's right. I think what I see now is that a lot of people from then had more to know about less. So there were fires and there were accidents, essentially. Yeah. There were chemical incidents, but there was there wasn't flooding on the county-wide basis that there is now. So flooding emergencies, there was terrorism. London had seen a lot of terrorism, but the fire brigade in that time turned up, put the fires out and helped rescue people and swept the glass. There was so the range of stuff that firefighters need to know today is much broader. Yeah. But we probably knew more about what...
That's what I'm saying. People use that, and I'm not throwing stones, but some people use that as a cop-out sometimes.
Yeah,
like, but now we're jack of all trades, master of none. I'm like, yeah, but you're not even getting the basics right anymore. Yeah. And I say that for myself. Like, I had that misperception of where I felt like and this is why I call the podcast Learning Out Loud, because I had this misperception of where I thought my knowledge base was. And then you sit down with somebody, and I'm not blowing smoke up your ass because you're far from the only person. You know, we speak about Carl Hasselman and other people that have got this massive depth of knowledge, and you go, oh, wow, crikey. You know, you're talking to somebody, and they turn to you, and they're like, oh, you know, ABC, and you're like, yeah. And you can probably tell a lot when people are like, oh, he doesn't really know what I'm on about, because your level of knowledge back then was significantly deeper.
Yeah, and there was a lot of... There was a lot of stuff that was pointless, a lot of stuff I never used, like knowing the gap between the rounds in the 135 ladder and...
that stuff was never... But the stuff about constructions and stuff like that was really colossal.
Important. Yeah, it was really important. And at no point did I mean, bearing in mind I was an 18-year-old kid when I came in, I'd always wanted to be a firefighter, and I'd sort of studied it, but I didn't know what I was studying. I just read books and stuff. So
you've grown up around it as well, because you were visiting the station.
I was visiting the station, but I still didn't know so I knew the reality of what it was like being at a fire station, sitting there as an observer, but not what they knew and what they did in fact. So when I turned up at training school, luckily I wasn't long out of school, 2 years out of school, just over, literally, or 3 years nearly. Sorry, I was pushing 19 when I started, so I was just about 2.5 years out of school. So learning stuff came very quickly to me. But when people started talking about chemistry and physics and hydraulics and all of that, I thought, wow, okay. And then building construction, but I knew nothing. But by the time I got to the end of that 20 weeks. I knew all about what King and Queen truss roofs were and sagging arches, and that's not a rude thing. That's not a rude thing. A sagging arch is an arch over a window that's cracked because of fire. So that by all accounts that doesn't get taught anymore, and and it's missing because I was evidencing that. So despite where I ended up at the end of my career, the knowledge I brought with me came. Experience was a big part in that, so I'd gained 3 decades or more of experience. But the underpinning knowledge that when I used to look at a building and what a building was doing and how it was behaving goes right back to Southwark Training Centre in 1987, and my exams as well. But then my exams were out the way in the first decade, and I didn't rush because, like everyone else, I did my leading fireman's written, as it was called, the year after I come out of training school, because pretty much everyone did, and it was used as a training school reunion, really.
We kind of brought that back a little bit when we started encouraging everybody to do their initial level 3 incident command IFE thing. Because it was like, look, it's not to diminish the qualification, but most people should be able to pass that straight out of training school, because it's a lot of applicable stuff. If you leave that gap, it can make it significantly harder. You said something really like significant there around you were in that kind of learning pattern because it was so close since you'd kind of left school. You were still in maybe that kind of a growth mindset. I do want to challenge that a little bit though, because like you have gone on and done lots more when you were significantly older in your 30s and 40s to do the roles kind of that you do now. And we do have a lot of people coming into services older now. You know, you get people in their late 30s and stuff coming into the emergency services. Do you think it is significantly harder to keep learning as you're getting older? Yeah,
well, in my experience, because I learn subjects cold very easily.
Okay.
Because I was in an education mindset still. I'd had prior
what
to
is
that,
an education mindset?
I don't know. I think because you go to school every day and you open yourself up to learning. So between the ages of 5 and 16, I'd done that.
Yeah.
And then I'd left and done a few jobs because I knew what I wanted to do as a career. So I my brain was still throbbing from years of.
Do you think we lose the appetite for that though, or do you think our ego gets too big? Because I think some people like they get into their 20s and they get this perception of themselves. They're like they've got a house or they've got a car or kids or whatever, and they're like, I'm a big person. I'm an adult. I need to act like an adult now, and adults should know stuff. And if I admit I don't know something, maybe I'm going to look like a bit of a dick, and maybe I'm going to embarrass myself. Is that a barrier to it? Because I feel like we don't actually lose the interest in it. Because I like people still ask interesting questions, but would they enter into that student mindset? Would they open themselves up to fail as they're getting a little bit older? I don't think they lose the ability to learn. Today's episode was once again brought to you by William Wood Watches. With the tagline, once forgotten, now reborn, every single watch has 100 years of firefighting history in it. They take an original Merryweather brass firefighter's helmet worn by firefighters in Britain in the 1920s and melt it inside every single William Wood watch. All of the craftsmanship is carried out in the heart of London, and they are proud to lock in the legacy of the brave firefighting heroes in every single timepiece. I think one of my favourite things about these watches is the fire hose straps. Now, these have gone from landfill to effectively luxury now. They receive fire hose from a massive amount of fire services from all around the world, which has come to the end of its life. The majority of the fire hose around the world is unfortunately ends in landfill usually. They clean the hose, repurpose it, and sew it into the luxury watch straps themselves. I always wear the red one, but when you get your watch, it comes with a series of different ones you can get. You can explore the full range of upcycled straps on their website, and you can see the link in the episode notes. If you head over to their website, you'll be able to check out the Jubilee, the Triumph, the Valiant, the Bronze, and the Chivalrous. All of those watches are available right there, and you can spread the cost of these over 3 to 6 months interest free. So for the pulse of the fire service right there on your wrist, head over to williamwoodwatches.com and take a look.
I took it apart. So I was always doing something. Because I did the first exam okay. And then I think after another year, I did the practical and passed that. And then I started thinking about the sub-officer's written. But then I'd bought a house and I was getting married. And then I sort of, it just every year apply for the sub-officer's written and you'll probably fail it. And I did for quite a while. And then my eldest daughter was born. And this was at the time of high interest rates and not much money around. So I then took myself off to start doing the knowledge, to drive a black cab in London.
Okay.
So that was 4 years. So that was essentially, it's never been recognised, but in terms of the input, it takes about 4 years. It's like doing a degree and it absolutely consumes you. So straight away, I got back into that mindset of learning, learning routes around London. And if you describe it to people who don't know it, they're like absolutely shocked that you have to, know potentially tens of thousands of roads in London.
Oh God, yeah.
100,000.
Well, internationally, it's recognised.
Yeah, it is.
Bloody hard exam.
Yeah. But you have to their face-to-face examinations every month or every 2 months, then down to every month, and that's mad, isn't it? And you sit there and so you have to tell them where the place they're asking for is, and the place you're going to, and then you have to describe like the route you're taking. You can't just say up there to road by road, left right. So leave on the left Liverpool Street, forward into Bishopsgate, left into Great Eastern Street, all the way to the other end. So that, of course, really gets you.
Nah, that must have made for an absolutely bulletproof firefighter.
Yeah.
Especially for a driver or just somebody in the back.
Yeah,
It's like, you can't beat that.
But I think that really got my brain expanded, because as soon as I finished that, I then thought, all right, I'm now in my late 20s. I need to get back to doing my exams, which I did.
Yeah.
And then I knocked the rest of the exams out.
With regard to the black cab thing, I don't want to go off too much on a tangent, but I mean, you still live around the London area now. What's it been like with all this Uber stuff? That must have been controversial, to say the least. When all that, I mean, and not just Uber, any company that's not a black cab.
To be fair, minicabs were always there.
The birth of SatNav must have changed it all. Really.
Yeah. Uber came along in about 2012, and by that time I wasn't really doing much more in the cab, but it used to get on my nerves. I was caught up in it.
Yeah.
And I used to share a cab with a firefighter. So when he was on nights, I'd go in and I'd use his cab.
Yeah. Did you have to actually buy them then? You rent them? Or
no, you can rent them.
What's the standard way people do it?
Probably buy them. If you're full-time, it's better to buy one, like a small business.
I love them down there, electric. No, I was down in London.
They're electric now,
60 grand.
They're 60 grand, yeah. It's outrageous.
Wow,
yeah.
I've got an electric car, but it's not bloody expensive.
The argument is if you had a sweet shop, you'd have to rent the premises.
Yeah. The damn weight of the thing as well, though. I was speaking to one of the cabbies there because I got in it and it's massive.
Yeah,
they're big bloody things.
Yeah.
For which, ironically, was a small streets in London. And he says, they're about 60k. You pay them off on finance, and I was looking around, and they're heavy things.
I mean,
it's strange.
Yeah, we bought a second, and before all these rules came in about. So I'm talking quite a long while ago now.
Yeah.
Because I got my licence back in '98. So, before all of the environmental stuff came in around London, which is no bad thing. It's the way it's been done, I'm not so impressed with. But basically, I rented a cab for a while. I had my own cab for a while. And then once I started realising that I was only doing it a few days a week, then me and another firefighter bought a second-hand cab, so it cost nothing. Yeah. We had some savings. We put in a few grand, I think about £5 each. We bought a cab for 10 grand, and that lasted us until about 2015. And that's the last time I really properly drove a cab. I've rented one for a couple of weeks since then, but I've always kept my licence, so I could go back to it tomorrow.
Stupid question. It's obviously a different. Why do you have to have a special license? Is it so you're not a serial killer?
I think it's because it goes back to the 1800s, to the Hackney Carriage Act. So when London was a place back in Victorian times, that the expectation was that the horse-drawn cabs, people would be, because you were dealing with the elite of society in London at the time, that people would be fit and proper persons, and they would be able to...
Person of good standing.
Yeah, and would be able to know their way around, and it just developed out of that. So you did have... It is
good, because you do hear the horror stories.
Yeah,
I mean, probably not these days, to be fair, but like 15 years ago, there was some horror stories.
Yeah.
Of people getting taken here or there or wherever. Not necessarily London-based, just like all over the world.
Yeah.
The horrible cabbie stories.
And I think that was always an issue... So the issue was there was one cab driver in London who was notorious because he was a serial rapist, but he stands out as an outlier because against the background of 100 odd years of licensed black taxis in London, he was an outlier.
It's always one that spoils it.
So he's notorious. But of course, with all of a lot of stuff with Uber at the time, allegedly there was a lot of reports of sexual harassment and all of that, and Uber weren't necessarily, and I can't say from experience, I can only say from what I heard, Uber weren't really taking...
Don't think they vetted people
No, that's right. So therefore,
fast and loose, we need drivers.
One really bad black cab driver ever, who was notorious because he was so bad, he was an outlier, but he stood out like a sore thumb. But Uber were having reports like that on a daily basis. Uber were having issues with people sharing cabs, sharing licenses. I think that's settled down now. So post pandemic, a lot of people, Uber was basically throwing money into keeping fares cheap. Okay. That no longer happens. The people who were driving Uber cabs were broke and run off. A lot of black cab drivers left over the point because there was no one in London. London was empty. So a lot of people I know with cab drivers went off and did other jobs. Tesco delivery drivers went back to doing this or that.
Amazon,
plumbing, Amazon, Most of them, a lot of them have come back, but it's still significantly fewer than there were pre-pandemic. But in terms of Uber and platforms like that have just gone off a cliff. They're now charging a lot of money. So not only do you not get the comfort of a black cab and the absolute knowledge, you've still got people who don't really know where they're going. And therefore, but now they're almost charging the same price. So that's why there's been a resurgence in London's black cab market. Will I go back to it? I hope not.
Yeah.
Only because...
Yeah, mate, you've done it.
Yeah,
Chapters
I've done
life.
it.
That's
gone. I've kept the licence, but traffic is so bad in London, it would drive me mad. And I'm well qualified in fire safety. And frankly, you get paid your worth.
It's pointless having that knowledge base if you're not going to use it in terms of the career that you've had.
Yeah, and post Grenfell, fire safety is a there was probably a lot of people tinkering around the edges, making a bit of money out of it. Post Grenfell, people now really want to check and scrutinise people's fire safety qualifications.
Absolutely,
even
so they should.
Quite rightly, because a risk assessment isn't a joke. It's like it could be seen as a tick box exercise, and you see, get your fire risk assessment, £99 all inclusive. I know what a proper risk assessment costs, and I know how much,
and the time, and the inspection,
and that's based on. So a risk assessment, if it's done properly, you're probably looking 3 or 4 times that for 99 quid. So unless it's very simple, and you're doing loads, so you're doing a load of simple 2-story estates on a block of flats, loads of simple blocks of flats on a big housing estate. You could probably do them cheaper, but when they're saying you can get your office or factory fire risk assessed for 99
especially somewhere like London, where, with the greatest respect, there's always been so much ingenuity in around how they use their space, because space is such a sought after commodity. Well, all over the UK now, but certainly in London, it's like the businesses that are there, the office blocks, the million different rabbit holes you can head down. There's no two places that are really the same, and with that inherently becomes so many dangers around fire safety. I mean, some of the courses that I've been looking to sat in with yourself, when we look at the way people are punching through voids and trying to retrospectively refit areas for a new business or a new restaurant or a new function, or 5 more, en suites down the other end of and you just think, Jesus, this is a recipe for disaster. And I imagine as we try and get more and more creative, and with the greatest respect, cut more corners, everyone wants to make a profit, and I appreciate that, but we're now seeing the cost of that if it's not done.
Without a doubt.
Scary.
Yeah, it is. I mean, a lot of what I look at is okay.
Yeah.
But they're commercial premises and they're low risk because they're offices and things like that. I've seen some other things that older buildings, blocks of flats, conversions. Yeah. So things that were houses converted into blocks of flats, where I thought I've come out of there and I've done the right thing. I've said to the owner, you really need to get this sorted now, yesterday, because frankly I wouldn't spend a night there. You'd be fine, but if it caught fire, you're probably not getting out. Because they've got basements and they've got unlined staircases and nothing's fire resisting. So you've got an ignition source in the basement, you've got a fuel load in the basement, and you've got wooden stairs that are not fire stopped. So if those two come together and you're on a 3rd floor converted flat and you haven't got a fire alarm, which you should have, because it's not a purpose-built block of flat with a stay-put policy, it's an evacuation. I'm just checking your eyes here, Pete.
Mate,
I want to make sure
you're going to lose me at some point.
No, don't.
Slow down a bit.
So some of that I've seen, and I think that's shocking. I wouldn't want to stay there. I wouldn't want to stay a night in that flat.
It's scary, isn't it? Because also they rely on the fact that the vast majority of the public have a real lack of knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely.
In this area, and I still walk into places and have to double take myself and go back and document B5, whatever it is. I'm like, what's the thing I was thinking? And I ring up FB department or a control, and I'm like, that definitely wasn't good. Let's go back.
And that's right. It is. There is some real miserable stuff out there.
So take me back, because you, like we said, you grew up in London. You didn't join until you were 18, but what was London like around the sort of 70s, 80s? What was it like from a community perspective? Why did you start? Why were you the guy that was visiting all these fire stations at such an early age? Did you have parents in it?
No,
uncles?
I think because I lived so where I don't know. So there was an interest, because I remember where I used to live before I was 7 was an old terrace street in London, and even then I remember liking fire engines. Don't ask me why, but I remember liking fire engines. And I remember, and I talk about this in the book. My nan lived in a block of flats that overlooked the river and Docklands, on the 11th floor, and I always used to see fires because there were a lot. So the East End of London, then like lots of inner city areas, there were lots of fires. Kids set fires all the time because they didn't have PlayStations and Xboxes. So there were always little
out
things
the streets,
on fire.
we're all street urchins, even myself back then.
And there were still lots of bomb ruins in London. So streets where the houses had been knocked down, no one had built on them. And they were what we used to call dumps. The generation before me who were in the Blitz, or remember it, used to call them bomb ruins. Historically now I call them bomb ruins, but when we were little we used to call them dumps because they were a block on a street surrounded by corrugated iron with just...
It's a bloody playground
debris.
for a kid,
That's right.
Playground.
So they were always on fire. There was lots of derelict buildings, derelict houses on fire because property wasn't worth a lot. So I had an interest, and I don't know where that interest come from, but it was there up until when I was about 9. I moved from Stepney to Poplar, and I lived fairly near Poplar Fire Station.
Why the move?
Just because we had to get out of those houses. Those houses were going to be refurbished.
Okay.
So up until that point, up until the mid-70s, they were pulling down old houses and building flats.
Okay.
Then they had...
Was this the council stuff?
Local council, yeah.
What was living like? Were they all one up, one down?
No,
because most people will don't know how tight space is in London.
Yeah, no, I mean, we were quite lucky. My dad's mum lived downstairs until she died, and then we had the upstairs.
See, that's a culturally crazy thing now.
Yeah.
We moan the price of people going to old people's homes and stuff like that, but people don't live in them anymore.
No, so it was essentially the house my dad grew up in.
Wow.
So when they got married, my mum, they could have probably stayed at my mum's parents in Limehouse in East London, but there basically was my paternal grandparents had the whole house. And effectively, when my dad got married, they just kept their kitchen, their front parlour, living room, whatever you want to call it, and a bedroom downstairs. And then upstairs, my dad had a bathroom put in upstairs, and then a kitchen put in upstairs. The bathroom was shared down, and it was so my wife lived. Her first house was where there was a bathroom built at the back, but the toilet was still an outdoor toilet.
Way.
Yeah, and my wife's slightly younger than me, so I won't age her. I'm not going to dare to age her. But yeah, my wife lived in a similar house, a similar terraced house in Poplar. So an old 1870s house that had the toilet out the back.
The loo and the coal bunker out the back.
Yeah, in the war, my grandparents' house was damaged. So they moved from number 17 Dunelm Street across the road to number 26 for a couple of years while the house was rebuilt.
Were they living in it when it was damaged, obviously?
Yeah, they just got bomb damaged by a bomb nearby. Just blew the back of the house out, yeah. They were in the shelter and such like, but they came home.
There's so many questions I want to ask you about all that, mate, because I mean, there's shelters and stuff, and now all the conversions that are happening and how everyone's building up and building down, and you forget how many shelters, were they predominantly overground, underground shelters? So
a lot of people had shelters in their own garden, which were pointless.
Like the tin
Henderson
ones.
shelter, tin shelter with a load of dirt on top of it.
Chocolate teapot.
Yeah, a lot of people used to go in basements of schools or wherever, and I know. So my mum used to go to the basement of the church opposite where she lived, in the crypt of the church, and that was fine. But my dad, I think, bearing in mind my dad went off to war because he was a lot older. So he was older. When you compare my age in my 50s, my dad, if he was still alive, God rest his soul, would be 98 now. So he was of that.
So he was
that generation. So when the Blitz started, he was 16. But 2 years later, he was off to war at 18 anyway. He went in the Navy and went off to war. So his window on the war. But anyway, so the back of the house at some point got blown off, and when they rebuilt it, they actually rebuilt it with a toilet and bathroom downstairs, which made it unusual because a lot of the other houses in the street, apart from those who were bomb damaged, still had outside toilets and no bathroom. But because it got rebuilt in the early 40s, surprisingly, even though it was during the war, they actually said, well, rebuilding this, it'll have a toilet and bathroom. So it ended up, when my dad and mum got married, they took the upstairs front room was our living room.
Yeah.
The back room was a bedroom that my mum and dad shared, and then eventually me. And then down the half landing to the bit at the back above the bathroom was my mum and dad's kitchen. So when
that was it.
That was it. Upstairs, 2 up, 2 down. Yeah, 2 up. Literally, we had 3 up. Yeah. 3 up, 3 down. In fact. Yeah.
You know, like I get annoyed at like we're sat in my home now, and there's 4 upstairs, and then there's 2 spare rooms here. We don't really use that front room, you know. It's a blooming kids' playroom, and there's a spare ping pong room. And I'm like, I get annoyed. I know I bought this house out of ego. It's not massive, but it's a house, and I'm like, I don't use it. I don't like it. It makes me angry. It costs money that I'm like, I bought this because I don't know why I got it. It's not a great, you know, but I'm like, we could have so much less and we'd be absolutely fine.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, but you kind of need to do it wrong to realise it's not going to make you happy.
And I'm in that position.
I think
now.
Families and communities were happier back then. I don't know though. I mean, what was community life back then?
I think it was fine. I mean, we all in that early part of my life, we lived in reasonably nice houses.
Yeah.
They were old and they were getting on in age, and they were private landlords.
Yeah.
So they paid their rent to a private landlord who owned lots of houses in the area. But we lived in
again is like a way for a lot of financial abuse, isn't it? You see that, especially when people from different nations and ethnic backgrounds have started moving into the areas around London. I'd love to ask you about that, because that for me, like sometimes I go to places around where I live and you see people with really low income, 6 or 7 people living in a flat together. They don't speak English, and you're like, how much are you paying for this? You get in and out by that fire exit outside. That's your, and you think you must have seen a lot of that as well.
Yeah, I mean more late. Yeah, we weren't that bad when I was little. That was going on a lot.
Was there many people from different nationalities living around the area?
Yeah, there was not. So there was
a lot of racism back then as well. Still.
I don't think I recognised that until I got older, until I went to secondary school.
Yeah. That's the beautiful thing about kids, isn't it? We don't really see it.
You don't see it. So
kids bully each other, but it's not like, you know.
In what's now Tower Hamlets, what was Stepney, Poplar, Limehouse, Bethnal Green, Bow, the areas, the districts that make up Tower Hamlets, around Brick Lane and Whitechapel was always an immigrant area. It was full. It was a lot of Jewish people around there when I was very young. And my mum worked for a dressmaker, lots of Jewish dressmakers. They were gradually replaced by Bengalis through the 70s.
Okay.
And then by the time the 80s came and I was at secondary school, they more and more Bengalis were coming over, and more of that area was changing, in as much as now Tower Hamlets itself is now probably the biggest ethnic group is probably Bangladeshis.
Okay.
Because just older people. So my generation moved out because we had no choice.
Okay.
Well, you couldn't. You either, you just couldn't afford. You couldn't get a council house, so you bought a house, and you couldn't buy a house around there, so you bought a house out of London. So it's in cycles. So where the Jewish community moved out and moved towards North London, Golders Green, and all of that, and further afield into Hertfordshire, a lot of what you might call the traditional East End.
What was it like in terms of security and financial security?
I never thought about it. Because you're so small, you don't know, and you don't start having problems until you start having problems yourself. So when you go to secondary school and start getting into fights and getting bullied, then you realise what a dark place the world is. For me, because I had a good upbringing, so my time in primary school. So like I said, we had to move out of those houses, because there had been a change in policy of knocking those old houses down and putting flats up. Sometime around the mid-76 maybe, in that part of London, they started refurbishing the old houses. So all of a sudden, we had the option of, you can stay where you are and we'll rebuild around you. Or there were, for a lot of our neighbours from that one street, there was a whole new little estate of council houses built in Poplar.
Okay.
And I think en masse, all of the street went to view them, because I remember we went and looked at number 73, and then our neighbours next door, and I remember talking to one of the kids who was saying, we'll be next door neighbours. And there was something wrong with that I think that was because it backed out onto the high street, and my dad said, no, can we have a look at one over that side of the square, which backed onto a school, and we ended up moving into that number 53.
Weird.
But that was just before the Jubilee, the Silver Jubilee.
Oh, okay.
So early 77,
Jesus,
we all moved, quite a lot of people from the old two streets where we used to live. Some stayed where they are, some went elsewhere, but quite a lot of us moved en bloc over the course of a couple of weeks, around April 1977, from these old houses to these brand new 2-bedroom council houses. Some were 3-bedroom townhouses. And we all turned up then. It was great. So we had a brand new house. So the old house was fine, because my dad worked and he was a builder. He kept it in good order. But all of a sudden we had some people for the first time had bathrooms because some of our neighbours still had outside toilets. But we moved into a house with central heating and all of that, whereas prior to that, the winter of 76 into 77, I was still sitting in front of a gas fire or a bar fire in the old place. Because my nan had died in 74, so we'd eventually taken over the whole house.
Yeah.
And we had what was the front room upstairs. What was my nan's bedroom become a dining room. What was our front room what was her front room became our front room.
Yeah.
My mum and dad then moved into the room at the front as their bedroom, and then I had my own bedroom at the back. And the old kitchen, but it was so quick that the old kitchen that used to be our kitchen became a dumping room from, what was left over my nan's stuff. And then all of a sudden, 74, 75, 76, we were moving out. So, and everyone was devastated. My dad was devastated. He'd grown up there. Yeah, he was really upset. And he wished he could have, it's an old conversation that I was witness to as a child. I think ultimately they decided that make a fresh start, because living while all the other houses were being done up and then having to move out next door while this house was done up and all of that, it was just, there's a brand new house, let's go and move there. So that is how I ended up in Poplar.
I was going to say then.
In 1977. And Poplar in 1977 was a lively area for fires for a lot of reasons. So I lived in a street called Saltwell Street. And at the top of the road was East India Dock Road, and so you turned right, went past a couple of turnings, went past a big park, and that's where the fire station was, opposite the market. There's a big market there. So I knew the fire station was there anyway, because we used to go shopping at the market opposite. But the fire station was there, and it was so busy, and I know, people from all over LFB claim they were the busiest, and they were, but it's certainly in 74, because I've got a document from Fire Magazine, a little press cutting that's saying Poplar Fire Station was the busiest in LFB in 1974. So I think in 1978 they were similarly busy. So
what would busy look like back then, just in terms of what they
probably not as busy for going out of the door as it was in the 80s.
Okay.
Because you look at the total call numbers and you think, I ain't busy. Because I've Poplar, Bethnal Green, when I started, was doing about 4,000 a year. Poplar was doing about 5,000-6,000 a year, but they had the TL there. But Poplar was probably doing only maybe about 60% of that back in the 70s. But the difference was their fire total was somewhere around 1,800 calls a year.
They're all going jobs. Yeah.
So they're not going out the door as much, but they're going out to things burning. Yeah. Whereas, the peak at Poplar in the early 90s was because we just had Canary Wharf built behind us, all of those great big new office blocks, and the AFAs were going off over there. So we were sometimes going over there 6 or 7 times a day.
Yeah.
So that's why Poplar was so busy then for 15, 16, 20 turnouts a day, because it had a TL. And that TL, bearing in mind, prior to, let me say, 92 maybe, TLs were on the PDA for everything, everywhere, pretty much in London.
Really?
So they were down to about 15 aerials then for 103 stations. Wow. Apart from the outer suburban stations, almost every street address had an aerial on it. Mm-hmm. So if you were at an aerial station, the thing just went in and out all day. And some of them, like Soho and the ones that remain now, Soho, Paddington, they just didn't stop. I remember, and other places I've done standbys. If you got a standby, and I was an aerial operator eventually, and if you got a standby to somewhere like Kingsland Road or Soho or Dowgate in the city, you know that you were just going to be sat on a fire engine going up the road on blue lights coming back. It very rarely did anything.
Yeah.
But
do you think there's been any kind of resurgence like that from, I know you still have a lot of friends that work in LFB and stuff like that, since like Grenfell, because everyone's twitchy, tricky finger,
aerials,
was scared.
All of it. So
has there been an increase? Has there been a massive more purchase? Do you know?
Yes,
I know you don't want to hold your account to figures or anything, but
from what I understand, lots of different fire services. So I know
you've had a lot of places knee jerk and get one, and you're like, they've got like 2 high rise.
I think
build fires in tall buildings.
London was due to replace its aerial fleet anyway. So there's a little bit of politics at play here. London, because of the so we renewed our fleet in 2007. 4
TLs. 15-year fleets, are they?
Yeah, well, because of the ULEZ, the low emission zone, they had to be changed anyway before Grenfell. So the order was going through.
Are we not exception to that? Do we not get to do it? I don't know what the exceptions are with stuff like that.
What, in terms of what? No, we're not. No, there is no exemption. No. You play the part. Yeah. I mean, there is an exemption because
I appreciate. I said to somebody recently, we've got to lead by example in terms of converting a lot of our fleets to electric. But it's like 800 grand versus 300 grand.
To be fair,
electric versus standard, and it's like, okay, but unless you're gonna fund, subsidise, or whatever, a lot of these fleets.
There was lead-in times, and there are still vehicles on the fleet that haven't been replaced that are not ULEZ compliant, and they are allowed.
Okay,
but as long, you're proactively planning for it anyway. So, bearing in mind, we stopped owning our own fire engines back in the early 2000s when that whole mishmash again. It was the leasing group, then Asset Co. Finally, Babcock.
I don't quite get that because it's not just London. It happens everywhere now. But I'm like, there's can't be much of a market for second-hand fire engines. So the companies that buy them and the emergency ones and stuff of the world that then convert them, I'm like, what do they do with them after that, other than send them to lesser socioeconomic countries and lesser like they're third world countries or whatever?
I'm not a budget expert, but I think they are. No, I think they are. Certainly in terms of fire brigade, it's in your. They're out of your capital budget, but they're a big lot. They're a loss leader, aren't they?
Yeah.
Because traditionally, back in the day, you bought a fire engine for 70 grand and sold it for 300 quid. Now we're talking £500,000.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. And it's not just that. I feel like because we're outsourcing a lot of this stuff, we're also got less skill sets in our services because we're getting rid of a lot of workshops and a lot of, a lot of fire engines. I mean, back in your time, you used to maintain a lot of the vehicles on the stations.
No, the mobile repair van used to come. Anything that like a service it used to go in for, most running repairs were done by a guy who used to turn up in a van and fix them.
It wasn't a shoelace and a
bit
of this here and a bit of this there.
I think, I'm not going to... I mean, they were good mechanics because they were apprentice mechanics. They were employed.
Well, I'm not saying they weren't, but also mean like a good firefighter is a resourceful firefighter. Yeah. It doesn't mean they do everything by the book. They get the job done safely, but it may be with a bit of creative...
Yeah, because they'd have a spray can, and if you bent something out, it'd be bent straight and sprayed and all of that. And
That's
often...
That's how I found it.
Yeah. In terms of the aerials, so there'd always been an argument to have more TLs and less. So the company who owned them, been through various guises, wanted all ALPs. Thankfully, Mike Cotton, who now Mike's retired. Mike was always an aerial operator. He now works for Emergency One. He's a big player, and he goes all over Europe.
We'll have to have him on for a chat.
Yeah, Mike's really good. If you want to talk about aerials, Mike's an expert. But there were a group of us, one retired DAC called Terry Adams, who spent a lot of his career at Paddington. There were quite a few of us who really were advocates of TLs because of the way London is. They're much easier deployable.
I was about to say, just to expand on that a little bit, because some people, we're not going to talk about if things were right or aren't. I'm not going to go into the Grenfell conversation, but people say, we needed more of this. And I'm like, you don't appreciate the complexity, A, of London, B, a footprint of one of those types of vehicles, what it needs and what it can and can't do. You can't just go... where's it going to go? Because a lot of places, what a lot of people don't know is there's only certain places you can put these things to access certain parts of certain buildings all over the UK. Right. It's not just London.
No, it's not. That's right. I mean, so in terms of for rescue, TLs are better because they get to work quicker and they're more adaptable. You can put a TL through a tree, literally through a tree. So if you take places like... certain bits of the West End where all the hotels used to be, they would be in slip roads off of main roads and they would be separated by trees. So back in the day when they were getting lots of fires in those premises, a lot of rescues were carried out by someone pitching a TL through a tree, easy in winter, not so easy in summer, but literally poking the head of it through a tree and it would reach the window.
For people that don't, because sometimes we have a lot of recruits and stuff that listen, go real super basic. The actual difference between a turntable ladder versus an aerial ladder platform. So, what's the mechanical difference for some people? Most people will know, but
a turntable ladder basically is a ladder is an extending mechanical ladder, more hydraulic now,
telescopic effectively. So it can just punch out straight in front of itself.
Like a 135 ladder is 3 rounds that come up to 13.5 meters that are portable and manually pulled up. If you imagine, I don't know, 4 25-foot ladders, all put together and operated by the vehicle.
With a massive counterbalance on the back of it.
Yeah, so effectively, now they're all hydraulic, but so back in the day you had hydraulic platforms which were Simon Snorkels, made by Simon Snorkel, and they were a series of booms with a cage on the end, and the booms unfolded, so they weren't really that flexible. You could only work in a certain arc.
Yeah.
Because of the mechanics, turntable ladders tend to be deployed much quicker. They're not as heavy, don't need to be settled on a base.
Plus you can go up and down them.
Yeah.
Whereas I can air a lot of platform, you're in it, and then it goes.
Yeah.
And then if you want to get down, you've got to come down with it slowly.
Yeah. And so if I was going to be putting out big warehouse fires in the middle of the Midlands, then I'd want ALPs.
Okay.
Because they'll chuck a couple of tons of water a minute on a fire. You put them on 4 great big jacks, lift them off the ground, and they're really good. They're good for what they are. ALPs are marvellous. They're a very and I was a TL, HP, and ALP operator over the course of my career, in the operation or the time when I was station based. ALPs have their HPs. The ones we had in London were tiny, or 22 metre SS220s. They were always notoriously useless because the reach of them was poor. Even I've had them as a senior officer. Yeah. I've seen one had one pull up on an house fire where the roof's going, and if you've got a front garden and a drive, which you can't get it on, even though it reaches 77 foot or 22 metres, its projection is so poor that the cage is just above the front of the house. Yeah. So you still can't get to the back of the house, which is why...
You almost walk up to it and go, "You got enough water, mate?"
Yeah.
I'm not really getting anything there, boss. Can't really get the reach.
Yeah, and I think so I know Greater Manchester had these slightly bigger, most other brigades in the country had slightly bigger hydraulic platforms, but they were good for, them and ALPs are good for setting up, taking your time to set up, throwing lots of water through them. A TL in its traditional form was much better and quicker to get to work. Yeah. Modern TLs now, like the new ones London have got, let's put the 64 metre to one side.
Massive.
Yeah. The 32 metres are fantastic. Yeah. They have got the top ladder bends now, so they can do everything an ALP can. They can have lighting, they've got stretcher carrying capability, a crane capability. They were ordered while I was still in LFB. Because of knowing Mike and because of knowing a lot of people in LFB still, I've been down and I've been round both I had a look round them, been shown the 32 and the 64. The 64 basically came about because so the idea of a turntable ladder or an aerial appliance is, it's about when you've got to do firefighting above the height of a normal ladder. Mm-hmm. High-rise buildings, if you look at British Standard Code of Practice 3 from 1960s, anything above 60 foot, which is an old escape ladder with a first floor ladder attached to it, the building itself should protect you. So politically and through the media now, there's this narrative that to get out of tall buildings, you need tall ladders. That's rubbish. First of all, because the building itself, and I don't want to preempt Grenfell here, but while we're talking about aerial appliances, if you've got a fire in a roof of a building down the high street, that's what they were designed for. Yeah. Rescue to a degree, to a certain height. So the aerial appliances in London not working at Grenfell Tower because the whole of a 24-storey building was on fire was a problem, because our aerials were only 100 foot, and that was all they were. They were never meant to be used in tall buildings, because that's what wet and dry rising mains and compartmentation
it's a bit like on a very simplistic plan. If you ask the company, what's your method of escape, they can't just go ring the fire service. No. The way you design your building should be capable of self-rescue, for want of a better description. There should be a safe way. We are not the solution.
No.
We're of stuff, everything's gone wrong. Everything you planned for has gone wrong. Then we'll do something. People should be able to get out safe.
That's right.
Wherever they are.
Your fire safety plan and the building regs have all failed.
Shouldn't say fire service anywhere on that document unless the real worst case scenario at the end. Plus, I want to say the weight of these things as well, because London's quite unique. But I know we were speaking with one of the previous guests on the podcast about the weights of these, like going outside some massive buildings and them falling through concrete and falling through slabs. Because what we forget, and London perhaps is quite unique in this as well, there's a lot of stuff that happens underground in London, from networks and cellars and subways and all sorts of different access. These things must be getting colossally heavy. They must limit them as well.
I'm
waiting for one to go for a bloody bridge at some point.
The 32s are fine. They're not much heavier than anything ever has been. Certainly, our original early 90s ALPs were 32 tons. They were massive. And they only went 3 foot taller than a TL. But the technology back then from Bronto Skylift was it was so heavy it had to be on a HGV1 non-bending chassis. I remember the driver at the time for the first.
You wouldn't be able to take a rigid like that anywhere around London.
No, that's right. But the new 64 metre TL does fit on a chassis that is like our old ALPs. So it is now on a much smaller chassis. But the thing is, we had to call on Surrey Fire Brigade on the morning of Grenfell Tower to use their 42 metre aerial. Why did they have a 42 metre aerial? Because they've got funfairs and they've got Thorpe Park and all of that. Yeah. And therefore, they've got a business requirement in their fire brigade to say, for rescue purposes, we need that height. So that embarrassed LFB. That got lots of people who don't know about firefighting, who want to get involved in politics, suggesting our ladders should be taller. Danny Cotton and Tom George, who were the deputy commissioner and commissioner at the time, felt they had nowhere to go with it, and then we ended up when that TL fleet that was already due for replacement came up for replacement. Instead of buying all 32 metre TLs, which had been the plan, the new 32 metre TLs were planned before. All of a sudden we now had to have a few, I think 3 64 metre TLs.
It's like when somebody screams a fact at you, and it is a fact, but it's an irrelevant fact.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're like, is the wall red or not? And you're like, it is, but that doesn't change what we need. Just like, is it or not? And I'm not. You're right, but that's not. It's not going to make a difference if we'd have had it. It's not designed for rescue.
That's right, and certainly some of the people who have been misinformed around, like a lot of people who are living in high-rise buildings,
which is going to be petrifying.
And a lot of the leaseholders, particularly around East London, where they actually wanted to provide money to have one put back in Tower Hamlets, a 64 metre TL. And I got into a debate on social media and private messaging people, and met with someone, and I said, listen, you've got to understand the physics of this. First of all, most of your tall buildings, and I gave them some examples. I said, they're typical of what's going on in the area, whether they're traditional council blocks, whether they are your new modern Dockland skyscrapers. Yeah. There's a couple of things. First of all, the way that physics works, if you're going up 64 metres, this thing cannot go up in a straight line. It will fall over. Yeah. So it needs a jack-in width that's probably wider than most of your roads. Yeah.
The higher it goes, think about, like you said, the
envelope. And then you've got a triangle. You've got got a right angle triangle that has to fit in. So all of a sudden, to get it to 64 metres, you probably need to have that building 27 metres away. Yes. So almost 100 foot away from the building. So actually, to reach you...
We're pitching it in the middle of the river.
Yeah. To reach you on the 12th floor, which it will reach, or the 14th, 15th floor, which it will reach, it'll have to be in the middle of that tower block over there. Yeah. Because there's no bit of road space that can fit on. And also... what about the people above that height? Because there's buildings now. So there's 70s. The tallest residential block in London and the country is one of the new developments just off of Canary Wharf that is 77 floors high. 77 residential floors. So
how much do you think it is to live at the top of that?
Oh, millions, yeah. There is probably now, and I don't know, I'm 4 years retired. That was my borough, and I did have an idea, but there's probably... something in the region, just in that little area of Docklands, a tiny part of London, there's probably now in excess of 20 buildings that are over 50 floors that are residential. Forget the commercial buildings, well in excess of 20 that you would call quote unquote super tall. Yeah, meaning they're like 40, 50, 60 floors.
What does like a drill look like on that? And I'll say before we go any further, you've been out 4 or 5 years, whatever it is now. So everything is to the best of your recollection. Blah blah. Steve reserves the right to all of this. We're trying to remember as best we can. But I'm like, for me, where I live, when we do drills, it's like, if it's safe to use a lift, we take it, start up a bridge. What would a drill look like? I mean, forget an actual incident, because hopefully an incident would have run straight, but 77, it's going to take ages to get. If we had a fire on the 70th floor of something,
your lift still has to get to the top. So you have to have a firefighting lift. Can't be a fireman's lift. That's old technology.
What's the difference?
Fireman's, you've done the course, Pete, you should remember.
Everyone's listening for everyone's benefit.
So the difference is, effectively, a fireman's lift is a non-protected lift in a regular building with just a switch to call it to the ground floor.
Yeah.
A firefighting lift is designed to a British standard with minimum capacities for weight, height. It has to have a communication system, separate sorts of separate power source, waterproof circuits. Has to be able to reach the top floor from fire service access level within 60 seconds. So if you've got to go 70 floors, minimum of 8 persons, minimum of 1.1 by 1.4 metres. It's a British standard.
It's got to have an escape hatch in it.
Out of London, not in London.
Ooh, controversial.
Yeah.
Why?
Because the thinking, I can only assume, and this is an assumption, the thinking is if you are in Warwickshire and you are the whole time crew in one of the main towns, and you are the first response to a high-rise fire and the lift breaks down and no one else is coming for quite a while, then you've got the ability to self-rescue.
Okay.
Get out of the top of the lift to self-rescue. I can't pin it down. I could never pin it down, the reasons why. But I think, therefore, logically, the assumption is LFB are so resource-heavy that we've risked, because it's risky to put a firefighter out of a risk to get out of the top to finally make their way out of the lift shaft is risky. So I think LFB risk assess it out, saying we'll have enough people to carry on fighting the fire, and we'll also, they're in a protected lift, we will be able to get someone to rescue them. Therefore, we don't want firefighters self-rescuing through the hatch. They are still provided, but London doesn't insist on that standard. But I would have thought, knowing what I've seen with my own eyes in London, people like Coney or Otis Lift say, yeah, thanks for that, you get in the hatch anyway. Because it's part of what we build,
we're not going to change them just for you.
It's like
if
saying,
you want to put a special lock on them, knock yourself out.
One country in Europe wants a Ford Mondeo with a single headlight.
You do see this a bit with LFB though.
Because
they're so big. They've got all the money. They're the biggest service, certainly in the UK, and one of the biggest in the world, I think, because a lot of other ones are actually separated up into separate services. People think in New York and all this, they're all the same. They're not. So London do sometimes have a habit of, no, we're not going to do that. Or we're going to do this.
Yeah.
Even in terms of national operational standards and things like that.
Without a doubt.
I wanted to ask, just for everybody as well, like we were saying before about risers, when did that change? Because when people are hearing 70 floors and they're thinking dry risers, wet risers, where do those distinctions happen? And because will it have been during your time when it changed to the height for wet risers?
Yeah, it was
wasn't
2006, I think. 2006,
Really?
2007. No, so before 2006, wet risers used to come in at 60 metres. So it was 18 metres.
20 floors for people that are thinking roughly how high that is.
18 metres for a wet riser.
Which isn't much.
No, 18 metres, which is 60 foot. 18 metres, which is about the 5th or 6th floor. Need a dry riser. Above 60 metres was a wet riser, and then in 2006 that come down to 50 metres. Okay. So every building 50 metres and above built since 2006 should have a wet riser. Every building built prior to that would have a wet riser over 60 metres, which is roughly over 20 floors. But don't forget, Grenfell Tower, 24 floors. No wet riser.
Well, they couldn't enforce it retrospectively, could
No, but even so, 60 metres, that building was 64 metres, but the 60 metres isn't about, if you can get to the floor of the uppermost occupied storey within 60 metres, then you don't need a wet riser. So arguably, Grenfell Tower...
So if you've got like split flat, or it could
still
be...
So basically, Grenfell Tower was 64 metres to the roof. Take off the plant room, take off the...
Plant rooms, lift rooms or whatever.
The plant room, take off the actual floor-to-ceiling height of the 23rd floor, the uppermost occupied floor. Then the floor level of the 23rd floor was probably about 59 metres. So... The 60 metres probably didn't come in till halfway up the wall of the top floor. So it says, as long as you can make the floor level of the uppermost occupied storey and not storeys above, not the plant room. So the plant room doesn't count. It's the uppermost occupied storey. So that's why I always say to people, don't pin 20 floors on having a wet riser. I said it's about 60, 50 metres. I said if you're going down the road, I used to say to my people, and the building's got 10, 15 floors ahead of you, banged on, you've got a dry riser. if you're going down the road and you're losing count and you're trying to count like 28, 29, 30 stories, it's going to be a wet riser. You should know where those really tall buildings are.
Yeah.
But if you're off your ground going down the road, if you're going down the road and it looks to be around about the 20 mark, assume nothing until you get there, because around the 20s, you could be full either side, depending on age, depending on the way the floors are laid out.
Assume worst case scenario.
Yeah. So if it's really tall, you'll have a wet riser. If it isn't that tall, you'll have a dry riser. In the middle, assume nothing until you get there.
Today's episode is supported by our good friends over at Duty Crew Coffee. Now, as you're probably aware, coffee is the most popular drink worldwide, with over 2.25 billion cups of coffee consumed every single day, and over 70 million of those in the UK alone. Most of this is consumed in our crew rooms, our watch offices, and by our emergency services frontline staff. So when you're getting together around the mess table, don't be drinking no nasty ass cheap coffee. Nobody likes that guy that brings the cheap stuff. Life is too short to be drinking crap coffee. So if you head on over to dutycrew.co.uk or click the link in the podcast below, you'll be able to jump on over and see the Duty Crew coffee products. They come in 227 gram oversized high quality recyclable standard pouches, and they are individually wrapped 10 gram coffee bags. They're quick, mess free, convenient. They have a one-way degassing valve, which is an absolute must for storage of freshly roasted coffee. You can get the 20-pack response bag. They've got the HQ, they've got the No Duff, they've got the Unity, the Decaf, and of course all of their products are Rainforest Alliance certified, Fair Trade Foundation, and most importantly, they taste freaking epic. I started drinking Duty Crew about 2 months ago, and then when I fell in love with it, I got in contact with them and they came on board with the podcast. So jump on over to Duty Crew Coffee if you want some of the good stuff. Now back to the podcast.
So dry rising mains are built for low pressure and high flow, basically. So where fire brigades have gone wrong over the last couple of decades is everyone is now thinking about firefighting tactics and droplet sizes. So a lot of us now have got these nozzles that are combination nozzles that put fine droplets in the air. The design for dry risers hasn't taken account of that, or wet risers. They're basically about putting a big smooth bore nozzle on and being able to chuck out at low pressure.
Gone back to that, though.
That's right.
Now, only like in the last 8 years.
Yeah, but low flow. So a dry riser is designed for high flow, low pressure. So you're 4, 5, 6, 7 bars out of the main, but out of a big nozzle where you're flowing 1,000 litres a minute. That's what it is. It's not about being able to flow a 475 litre a minute perfect little combination droplet. That is in contradiction of what a dry rising main is. But what you will have in a building with wet rising mains is to make sure that you've got the ability to flow. And you've caught me out now because I know it and I teach it, but 1,500 litres a minute or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's 1,500.
1,500 litres
assuming
a minute.
you're only going to get about 6 or 7 bars.
Which you will get. You should be able to get 3 400 litre a minute jets off of a single riser. They're the performance figures for risers that come off the top of my head.
I know what you're saying, because some people are thinking of the CFBT tactics where we kept wanting to increase the pressure on hose reels to get those droplet sizes and crazy little quadrifog combinations and coning variations.
But it's flow that puts fire out.
Yeah, at the end of the day, and certainly at that height.
But even it was always an argument. I was a great advocate. I mean, Paul Grimwood was I was one of his early believers, and I remember doing some things in fires, and I had everyone walking in off the street, colleagues, saying, I'm going to try hydraulic ventilation. I remember the block we did it in. I remember a block of flats doesn't exist anymore. Me and a friend of mine, Dell, went in, put a bedroom fire out, and I said, Dell, I'm going to try hydraulic ventilation. What are you talking about? I'm going to try hydraulic ventilation in BA. And we did it. I thought, right, okay, get to the window, open it up, get a cone pattern, turn it on, and it started soaking the smoke out. So much so that Dell went outside and said, have a look at this. Come and have a look at it. With all the others outside, have a look. And so I was an early believer in it, and I remember.
Have you seen that study where they have variations of they try the figure 8 version? They try we've got that study somewhere on one of my hard. Did you send it to me? Somebody sent it to me.
I don't think it was me.
No, it was John. I'm going to forget his name. Sorry. Anyway, he sent me it. I'll tell you what, we'll do an episode on it. Anyway, sorry.
But we where LFB, and I can only talk for LFB, where LFB went wrong, once they finally adopted compartment fire behaviour training and all of that, it became all about fog attack and nothing else. What we forgot to teach was the fact that you've actually still got to put water on the it's great for keeping you safe in the way. And we nearly lost a couple of fires. We had a really significant commercial high-rise Telstar house in 2003. 4 floors of a 13-storey office block burnt. It wasn't a sprinklered building. It was an old-style 1960s office block. So it just jumped from floor to floor to floor. The two of the guys who went in and nearly got in trouble, and thankfully they were safe. I know them. I'm not going to mention their names. One's a brother of someone I know, and one is now a senior officer. They were unfortunately pushed. They went in firefighting what was effectively a 500 square metre floor open plan office on fire. Wow. With a 45mm jet with a Acron branch at the time, which is why LFB then upgraded to go back to some sort of smooth bore. But they were effectively trying to pulse it. Yeah. Because it became the be-all and end-all. Thankfully, that's moved on now. And certainly, and we were saying about the stuff I knew back in the day. I knew lots of technical content, but no one really taught me how to put a fire out. In fact, I didn't go to put a fire out until I actually went and put a fire out. But now the young people are trained in all of that. They do know what that means, and are taught in proper live scenarios, compartment fire behaviour training.
What sort of were the fires? Firstly, what was the first fire you went to? Because you were cutting your teeth on a whole different kind of fire variations when you first came in.
The first fire on my first day, it was my second shout. The first shout on my first day was about 11 o'clock, and that was a bonfire that was being put out by Poplar, ironically. It was on their ground. The second shout was on just on the border of Bethnal Green and Poplar, which is my first station. It was on a corner, and funny enough, I put the same building on fire years later on Twitter last week. It was a little car repair workshop on a corner. Yeah. So it was on a junction, on a 4-way junction. It was a typical car sales front that had about 5 or 6 cars for sale, a caravan that he sold the cars from, and at the back was a workshop. That was on fire. So that was just around lunchtime on my first day duty. Yeah. So my first fire, and that was a lot of.
What did it feel like?
It was exciting.
Yeah.
I didn't
scared, petrified. I mean, you were going in with, I'm assuming, a much more experienced hand.
Well, I didn't go in on the first fire. I went. I was just get the hydrant, and I did. I got the hydrant, and I run a hose to the hydrant, and I run the wrong way.
Love it.
In my panic, and I took
when you arrived there.
I took the female end to the driver, and he just swore at me and said, "Other end."
Do you know what? Just zoom out for a second there. How come we never went full like Storks couplings like a lot of other nations did?
Yeah, I don't know.
But now we're never going to, because they're just colossal infrastructure that we've got.
Yeah.
Mind you, you'd only have to come up with one adapter for every appliance.
I think
we never went there.
No, the instantaneous was really good. I mean, it was post-war, wasn't it? Because a lot of the old LFB Retirees Club, even though there are no round threads left, by going back in time, the LFB Retirees Club, from when all of those old boys retired decades ago, was called the round threads because they grew up on threaded hose. And then post-war instantaneous came in. Instantaneous is brilliant because it clicks together like that. But it's only as good as you making sure that your 19-year-old recruit doesn't run up. Unfortunately, it was one length away, and I was fast. He swore at me. I ran it back, picked the other end up.
He did see
it. He see it. Yeah. The driver shouted at me on my first day. I won't say what he said. It was. He had a few.
So then it was stunning. When was your actual first proper wear?
My first proper BA wear, funny enough, was with the exact same driver. Exact same guy. So
sort of set with PSS 90s back then. What was sort of sets were we on?
CB Gorman Firefighters, they were called.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So after
everything manual. Manual missiles, manual gauges, manual everything.
Yeah, everything. Yeah. No manual DSU. So just push a button and it made a noise like an electronic push bike horn. Yeah. Louder, but
pneumatically driven though.
What?
The DSU.
No, the DSU had nothing. So you had your low warning whistle that was pneumatic, but the DSU wasn't an automatic distress signal unit like now, so it didn't have any motion detection in it. If you went down,
but the noise was it battery powered then?
Oh yeah, battery powered.
All right, that's what I'm saying. It wasn't pneumatic. It didn't set off a separate cylinder of air that sounded the whistle.
No, it was basically like a small, intrinsically safe push bike horn.
Love it. I've not seen that one.
Yeah, just used to make a buzzing noise, a really loud buzzing noise.
I hope so, yeah.
Dictron, and there was another make. We had two on the run, Dictron and another company who used to make the two DSUs.
What was the job you went in?
Oh, so the job, right? We got called to next station's ground, Homerton's ground, with. So this particular driver, Steve, was on the back with me that day. Experienced firefighter, joined in the 70s. Turned up on Homerton's ground to a derelict old people's home, and there was a windowless storeroom, quite a big storeroom.
Okay.
Probably from memory, maybe about 20 by 20 foot. Quite a big room, a load of rubbish alight in it, a single door, some air bricks in it, and that was all. It was just a locked storeroom on fire. And Homerton had pulled up it was just on the borders of Bethnal Green and Homerton's ground, so north of Bethnal Green Fire Station.
Yeah.
Around a place just off of London Lane in Hackney. We pulled up, they pulled up, and I think...
Your memory's bulletproof like that.
I've got...
Mate, I have not got a Scooby-Doo. I can know what the job was, but someone says where it is, I was like...
No,
I know the patch.
I could be... If I could apply my memory to learning real facts, I could have been a doctor.
Yeah.
But all I've got is a memory for useless facts.
I'm good at documents and films and songs.
Yeah, so I think... Yeah.
My topography is horrific.
No, I think is what interests you. Because if I wanted to do, your memory, you could do a degree in physics. No, I couldn't, because I couldn't be bothered to remember it. It's about, and I'm always, someone's saying to me, I was talking to a friend just on Friday night, and they said, why don't you do the level 5 fire safety? And I'm like, really? Degree? 54 nearly?
Mate, yeah. You've got another 10 years in your career, sorry.
I don't know.
You'd be one of very few.
Yeah,
It'd be a big ticket item. Yeah. And you're probably and I'm not blowing smoke up your ass, there's probably a lot of people who could do it, but not many by comparison. How many could pass the 3 and 4? Anyway, we digress.
Yeah, we digress. But anyway, so I've turned up on this thing. So I've got a good memory.
Yeah.
I can see it, I can play it like a film. And there's a little bit, our governor's there and Homerton's pair are there. So it was our pump and Homerton's pump, ladder and pump. So 3 machines, typical PDA. Kingsland's HP would have been on the way, just to say that aerials were on all calls then, even that was a single story building. And there was some talk, and they said, oh, send a boy in. Yeah, he's with Steve. So Steve was a vastly experienced firefighter. So, yeah, do you want to go in, Dad? They used to call me Dad. Dude later on. But at the time, my nickname was Dad, short for
There's
my
worse
surname.
nicknames out there.
Yeah, there is. Yeah. And I probably got called some of those as well. But to be fair, they said, Dad, get your set on. You're going with Steve. It'll be great. Go in with Steve. And this is funny, because this is going to segue straight away back to Telstar House in a second. I'm good. You're good. I think you've
almost like it makes sense.
Yeah. So anyway, long and short of it, put our BA sets on. Never been in. I've been in derelict building fires already. Already been in lots of fires without BA.
Did you do much compartment training with compartment fire training in training?
0.
Really?
0. Yeah,
no
nothing
way.
at all. Never went in.
Did not have
went
any
into
big
smoke.
steel containers.
No, nothing
have...
at all there. No, nothing at all. There was BA training in smoke, and heat training was in a saunary room.
Really?
Where you just kept having to carry foam canisters up and down steps in
I
a
did
saunary
that
room.
over 2 metal benches.
Yeah, that's
and then on every 4th or 5th lap, they'd ask you to recite.
Yeah, that's
something.
it, exactly that. So that was your heat and humidity training, but there was no physical hot fire
you have to
training.
sing a song, sing the national anthem or something like that, and everyone just slowly forgetting what they're doing.
So I've got started in BA, gone in. Steve's gone in first. I've gone in behind him.
What line did you take in?
Hose reel.
Okay.
Typical. Everything was hose reels.
Yeah.
It weren't that much of a fire.
Imagine how hard it was before they had hose reels.
Sorry?
Imagine how much harder it was before.
They had low pressure hose reels, but not high pressure. So they just did. But that's what they did. But at the time, we used to use jets a lot more. Yeah. We didn't get into a hose reel culture until in LFB 91 when they brought out the Volvos with the wind-on hose reels.
Yeah.
People stopped using jets because they got lazy.
Easy.
That's what I'm saying. Because hose reels prior to 91 were wind-on.
Ball ache.
And so people would say, throw out a jet. But in this case, anyway, it was a hose reel. Steve's gone in. He's gone down on his hands and knees. I'm excited. I got in there and it was red hot.
Yeah.
And
but high fire loading in it.
Yeah, Steve's tugging me. I'm tugging my tunic. It was still the old double-breasted tunic. He's tugging me because I remember saying, it's hot, it's hot. He said, just get down, Dad, just get down.
You stood up, you bloody moron.
Yeah, because I walked in standing up. And so somehow or the other in the fuss, I didn't bend down. I got in front of him. And then I decided I was having no more of this. And on the way out, I trod over him. And then I walked out on my own, almost panicking, saying it's too hot to be faced by the remote. So my governor and the driver, which were the big, and all of Homerton's Blue Watch crew, who absolutely crucified me. You've left a man.
Where's
in
Steve?
There, you little get back in there, and I did. So that was horrendous, and I thought then I got slaughtered for it there. I got slaughtered for it when I got back at the station. I had a very good watch, actually. You don't know what you got till you've gone. Well, they were all much older than me. I was youngest by a country. I say much older. They were, a lot of them in their late 20s, early mid-30s. Yeah. The majority of the watch. There was a couple in their mid-20s, one or two in their 40s. So I really was a youngster. They crucified me for it, but actually it didn't go anywhere. And then a couple of weeks later on a Saturday night duty, it was the next tour on a night duty, we had a flat fire. And Paul, the sub-officer, said to me, right, you're going to go in MBA. Remember how it was last time, do this, get up the stairs, keep low, and I did it and I was fine. I went in with another Steve. There was 3 Steves on the watch, of which, so the first fire was Steve, who was one of the drivers. Then there was another guy, Steve, he was my BA partner, and he said, right, up you go. Remember it's hot. And I remember getting to the top of the stairs, because you're walking up the stairs, crawling up the stairs, hands and foot, feeling the heat, keeping low, looking below the smoke level, seeing glow from one little room. And then Steve said, have you found it? I said, yeah, it's over on the right. He said, okay, take your time. Give a little squirt with the hose reel, a bit of like before gas coaling, but give a squirt, see what you and you heard the plaster spooling and all that. He went, go on then, go in, put it out, and that was fine. That was fine. From then on in, I was fine. But go forward to 2003. Yeah. 13, 14, 15 years later, I've been ordered on to this 25 pump fire in this big office block as a ADO. It was a Green Watch job, and by that time, Steve, who was the firefighter, had moved, still at Bethnal Green, but he'd moved from the Blue Watch to the Green Watch. Yeah. He was on the job, and they were doing. I'd got given something like sector salvage, and I was walking up and down the building doing that, and I was having a briefing with another officer. Walked up the stairs, saw Steve, and he was pulling some hose up with his crew from Bethnal Green, and he went, "Hello, Steve. How are you? All right, Steve. How's things?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "What you doing?" I said, "I'm just going up towards the Firefly." He said, "Do you want me to lay down on the stairs so when you come running down, you can tread over me?" And that was it. So we're back to Telstar now, and he never let me in. We went earlier this year. I went to a funeral of a firefighter, retired firefighter who died earlier this year. Saw Steve at the funeral, and he still didn't let me forget it, and nor should he. Great, though. Yeah, just him. Only between no one else remembers it now. But he even said at the funeral, "Do you want me to lay down on the floor so you can tread on me?" Yeah. So, but it was great. But you learn.
How strong was watch culture back then? Because people, and I know we've spoke about this kind of before when people used to say about how bad bullying was, and also. I've not seen bullying in over a decade at least. No, older than that. So what was watch culture like then?
What it was would be unacceptable now, but actually, compared to some of the things I heard, I mean, I speak to a lot of colleagues of mine. We're all men in our 50s now. When I talk particular colleagues who I trained with, I'm not that I haven't spoken to any women about it, but many in our 50s who we meet up and have a chat. And another friend of mine, Mitch. He's a big lad, Mitch. He was, he's 6'2", 6'3", big strapping lad, 21. He used to get bullied by his station. I won't mention the station because it identifies people. He used to get bullied and threatened with being beaten up by a so-called hard man on another watch who run the station. Oi, big boy.
Beaten up for what?
Beaten up just for being there. Just for being a young kid. So I've heard some horrendous stories of that's one of the outliers. That this particular guy used to say to him, "I'm going to do you like big boy, come here, do this, do that. What you got to say to me? You got something to say to me?" And he'd go, "No, mate, I ain't saying nothing." And he used to think to himself, he'd think, "I'd smash it to pieces if I hit you, I'd smash it to pieces." Yeah. But the culture was the hierarchy. On my own watch. No problems at all. They were good. I didn't know. I was immature, without a doubt.
Yeah.
And I made my own life worse. They were a real fatherly watch. They were. I mean, my sub-officer, Paul, he had a son who was in the fire brigade, funny enough, probably 2, 3, 4 years younger than me. So I was, his kids were probably about 15 and 12 when I was 18, 19. Yeah. So he was like a father figure. He used to hold his head in his hands, roll his eyes at me. But actually, my first watch was a very understanding watch. But even so, I'd get regular soakings. I'd get regularly tied up. I remember my last night at the station, they'd threatened me and wound me up because I was leaving to transfer to Poplar, and there was another reason for that, because we got our station officer went off temporary ADO. We got a new station officer in who was an ex-school teacher, and me and him just didn't gel at all.
Okay.
And he retired a long while ago. I know I've kept in touch with, well, not in touch with him. I've had dealings with him now on Facebook and the LFB groups. He's commented on a few of my blogs in a very complimentary way. But at the time, he was a 1970s, early 70s school teacher who joined the fire brigade in the late 70s. So by the late 80s, he was a newly promoted station officer, and I was just a schoolboy to him.
Yeah.
But that made me leave. But on my last night at that station, they promised to do everything to me. So I literally, after roll call and putting my gear on the appliance, I went and sat in my car in my fire gear, looking at the back of the yard, listening for the bells and the lights to come on so I could get out of my car, run to the appliance. And but what actually, that turned on me because they realised what I was doing. So the wind-up became, they just got on with their evening, and I spent the whole night sat in my car between shouts, and they said, look, he's missed his dinner, everything, stupid boy. So that in the end, the wind-up turned round on me.
You said something there around fatherly watch, or just that aspect of a parenting watch. And I actually think now, as much as you say it was more prevalent then, I actually think like it's needed more now than it ever has been, because there was people coming into the services back then with characters, and they've been raised in communities where they were exposed to different things, no better or worse, but they had more character. And they were a little bit more, like you said, your dad was a builder, your dad was in a war, my dad was a builder. I had a crap job when I was a kid, 11, 12 paper round, and then I used to fill skips at my dad's work and stuff like this. So there was a lot more of that, which helped build character.
Yeah.
And then any bits that you missed would hopefully get picked up when you went into a factory job or you went into an emergency service, you went into the fire service. Now, I feel like not only are people not getting that character building aspect in their childhood, because you can't get a job now when you're 12 years old anymore, and also people just aren't going through, they're not trying to fix their own cars, they're not having all of that. And not only that, now they're coming into emergency services, we're not giving them the support they need sometimes. People are really annoyed and disappointed about the lack of skill sets or the lack of common sense of people coming in. And also, we're in a little bit of a calm wall sometimes in places where we can't calibrate it. We can't help you build your character, and because I'm scared. I don't want to.
I think there is
makes it bloody hard.
Yeah, there's a lot of assumption that there's lots of sledgehammers that have been deployed to crack walnuts across society.
Yeah, that's a great
because
idea. I like that.
You can't. Sometimes you've got to give a little bit of tough love, and I certainly have. I've got 3 daughters, and they're all different in character, and they're all. One thing they've got in common is their independence, because I was a ball breaker. I wasn't nasty to them. You could ask them, and they, like lots of other kids, they'll say he's the best dad in the world. But there was lots of Mickey taking. There was lots of, sometimes your failures would get held up and be laughed at, so you didn't do it again, and not made to be quote unquote no winners. There was no winners in my house, and you often hear that. No winners. Everyone, even the kid, there's winners and losers, and
always in life.
Yeah. So, and I think there is an understanding. And the other thing that's important to me, there used to be a saying that my parents would say when they talk about various people with kids or whatever, people in the neighbourhood. They'd say, "Oh, so and so, she thinks her boy can do no wrong, or her girl can do no wrong." And I've always had the premise that I've always used with my kid is to my kids, to us, you are the most important people in the world. The minute you walk out that front door, you are just one of 1,000 people walking down the high street.
And they shouldn't care.
You are not the Queen of England.
Yeah.
So therefore, the world doesn't owe you a living. And what's wrong with a lot of society is, I think, kids are so spoiled, and they're not. And so the royal prince or princess that they're treated like indoors, they go out of the door and they expect everyone else to bow and scrape to them, no matter what. People in authority, police officers, teachers, people who serve them.
Mm-hmm.
Daughter of a millionaire. Works in, because the millionaire's sensible. Daughter of a millionaire works as a waitress.
Mm-hmm.
Daughter of a relatively well-played
blue-collar
plumber, but has brought her as a princess. Literally thinks that because she's being served by that girl, who actually is a very beautiful daughter of a millionaire, just to give you a ridiculous analogy, thinks she can talk down to her. And that is the problem with society, I find, because no one puts boundaries on everyone, and every little prince and princess is the most important. I can cut in. I'm going to go down the outside of the roadworks and cut in because I'm more important than the rest of you.
And
So
I think
all
you
of
set
that,
people up for a really confusing, delusional, disappointing world, because they'll be constantly confused as to why they're not treated,
exactly.
and why I'm not getting these things. And you're just like, have you added? I always say to my daughter, add value. You know what I mean? Like when it's a very simple thing is always like, I always say to her, never ask me for money. And not because I'm like, ask me, Daddy, what can I do that's worth £1 to you?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Don't say, Daddy, can you give it? Don't be walking out to the world going, give me. Go, what value can I add that means that, because I don't, otherwise you put yourself in a victim mentality as well. Yeah. Add value. Get something because you earned it, not because you just gamed the system or someone gave it to you because you flashed your eyelashes. Don't do that, because that's going to run out.
Yeah, of course it will.
It'll run out.
Means nothing.
It means nothing. It's not worth it.
And I think so. In terms of in terms of society today, that will overlay itself as into the emergency services, and I think lots of issues. So from my own personal experience, as a manager of a couple of hundred personnel within a borough, a lot of the issues I dealt with were people who thought they were the exception and not the rule, and that often was the problem.
I remember you had an individual where there was an incredibly great female DAC or something like that you were telling me about before, where they'd had an underperforming member on their station. Am I right in saying that? Was casting in my mind back. An underperforming member.
No,
and again, it doesn't matter what stations and all sorts of stuff, but that would have never got away. I
won't name. There was a very good female station officer.
Yeah, sorry.
That was in one of my stations. She had this. Yeah, she had, after I went, she had problems with a recruit, but a trainee, whatever you call them now. And again, the trainee was of the opinion that, you know what, I'm not up for this. I don't need to do this, or I've got a problem with this. It was a bit of a victim mentality and a can't be bothered mentality, frankly, talking to them. And LFB took the view that she was the one who got moved, and that was shocking. That
really shines a great light as well, because people will say, "Oh no, it's because of this or the sexes or the races and stuff like that." But when they're doing it to somebody like that, who you'd hope they're giving the utmost support, especially to a woman in that sort of position. Not that they should be any different, but historically they haven't been given those opportunities. So when they are, you'd like to think the support is there for them. But when you get these people who are underperforming, who are really just never meeting the standard, and would make it very hard to manage those types of people. I mean, how did you used to deal with like an underperformer? If you had an underperformer on your station,
I think,
how do you manage to say it to them? Without being the dick.
I think I would always. I was always from the school of straight talking and giving them examples. And so one of my regular examples, and not individually, sometimes you'd have to you'd have to deal with people a little bit more robustly than others. Some people you could say, look, come on, wake up, pull yourself together, and they'd see it. Other people, you had to spell it out to them. But one of the things, certainly one of the things I'd say to new trainees would be, what is your expectation where you live? Where do you live? I live in such and such place. What is your expectation that if your house is on fire? If your mum, would you live at home? Are you married with kids? I've lived with my girlfriend. I've got a little. So what's your expectation that if your house was on fire and your child was trapped in, well, they'd want rescuing. And what would you expect the paramedics to do? Well, to be really competent. I said, so the people of this area, whatever station I was at, also expect that, yeah? Is it
Deserve
fair?
that as
Yeah,
well.
deserve that. Is it fair to say then that whatever's asked of you, you will be that person who delivers? Because you expect that. I've made it personal. You expect that from your loved one. My expectation from you as a firefighter under my command is that you are the people of this borough or this district or whatever pay and expect a fire service to be competent. So if you don't think you're up for it, or you don't think you're brave enough for it, or you don't think that's for you, then maybe this isn't the job for you. And it isn't just about you taking the money and hiding away, because one day it might only be you. Everyone's busy, everyone's deployed, suddenly something comes along, get a BA set on, there's someone trapped in there and you're not up for it. That's just not good enough.
No.
Because
it's not good enough for the public. It's not good enough for the person you're wearing.
No, that's right. Yeah, for lots of reasons.
What I mean? And certainly when you're like, look, you're not on probation anymore. What's going? Help me understand. Am I not supporting you enough? Is the service not supporting you enough? Do you not want to do this? Why are you not getting it? Because we've passed that moment now. You need to be good enough now, and you're not. Yeah. So you're endangering the person you're with. You're endangering the firefighter. You're endangering the public.
Yeah.
This is. Are you staying or going?
Yeah,
and are you going to immediately change from the end of this conversation onwards?
Yeah, and that was, and occasionally, I mean, most people thankfully got it. And I did manage.
For the people that don't get it, I find like now.
Yeah, I mean,
how do we get rid of them?
I don't know. And that was so. There were thankfully
because there's some frauds out there.
Yeah, there were, I was never involved in any of those cases. Thankfully, whether by luck or judgment, I never got any of those real pain. But there was some that I was on the periphery of. Some came troubled via somewhere else, came through me and ended up going out and are still in the system somewhere or not. Some have resigned. Some feel that they resigned and then took the LFB to court.
Sometimes we do just sift it onto other people. But just moving the
But frankly, a number of those were that LFB, in my opinion, at the time, weren't robust enough in dealing with them.
There was a time as well, and I can't remember what it was. A previous guest was talking about it, where they had changed their recruitment because they were in, and this is what worries me about now as well, because like LFB specifically we're doing lots of recruitment all over down the UK Fire Rescue Service, but London especially, like 600 people leaving this year. It's a big number, and they're desperate, and desperate is worrying when there's a pass mark that needs to be hit. So it's almost like now more than ever we need to make sure nothing accidentally slips through the door. Yeah. And I don't say that in like a horrible way, like a certain type of person or a certain. I mean just people that aren't of a caliber, or don't show or don't demonstrate the ability to reach a certain caliber, because we're onboarding so many people now, and it worries me. It worries me that they're coming in with that combination of a lack of character, of potentially an upbringing that maybe have sold them under an illusion of how hard they need to work at stuff, because it is a professional service. Yeah, it's a profession. And your breadth of knowledge, and many people in your sort of experience have had to demonstrate a lot of that knowledge. Whereas now, I feel like the pass mark's getting worryingly low in some places.
Yeah, and I think so. There is. I think there's always generationally. There's always been it was better in our day, and I've got to be careful that I don't fall into that miserable old trap. Yeah. It was always better in our day. Fires were hotter, we were tougher, all of that rubbish. But really, I mean, again, reflective of society. So I'm glad I'm not in a position of having to cure that problem, because I don't think there is. There are lots of people who want to be firefighters for really good reasons. That doesn't always necessarily reflect society. Mm-hmm. And you've got to, particularly in big urban conurbations, you've got to do, not only have you got to do it from a legislation point of view, you've got to try and reflect society as well, which means you don't always get the best people for the job. And there is evidence of that, and organisations will always dispute that. Mm-hmm. Empirically, I would say no. There were different standards. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying you lowered standards, because that's a really harsh thing to say. But you changed a number of standards, and you maybe didn't scrutinise as much as you should have done. Therefore, 6 months, 12 months, 6 years down the road, we're now dealing with problems where there was probably a kid sat on the corner somewhere and on his computer, who lived 15 miles away in the other direction, who always wanted to be a firefighter, who was like me, and never got the opportunity because he might not have got to go onto an outreach day
Yeah.
and might have just been one of many people with an application form that didn't get sifted. Well, that's an organisational loss, because that person now would be the person who will go the extra mile, who will be saying, like, I'm not saying we should be a yes sir, no sir organisation, but you shouldn't, but it needs to be on the fire ground. It needs to be an autocracy, because I'm responsible for this fire, that building, those people trapped, and you as my firefighters. Therefore, I expect a little bit of, when I say jump, you say all right. Not to the point I'm going to kill you. Hopefully, I'm adequately experienced and trained that I'm going to make the right decisions. Yeah. But the time for a debate is at the debrief.
Yeah.
Or when we train for this tactic, have the debate then. Don't have the debate on the fire ground, and therefore there is an expectation that people will do. And by and large, thankfully, reputationally, I never had that problem. I never had the problem that, in almost every case, my name went before me. And it was only not that I'm anything special, but I was just quite well known in one area over a long period of time. And I'm sure if I'd have turned up at the other side of London, at 4 o'clock in the morning, no one knew me. They'd think, what's he talking about? But thankfully, most of the time, my reputation went before me a little bit, in as much as I always got traction on the fire ground. If I had an idea, it must have made sense, because everyone seemed to buy into it, and generally it would work. And I think that, so, I was quite fortunate, but there were cases of people just not getting it. And like I said, this isn't a debating society. We will discuss this later. Next. Off you go.
That's what worries me sometimes about people that get pushed for promotion. And again, sometimes this is a sort of an equality conversation, which doesn't need to be ever, but it's like people that get pushed for promotions, they just don't have the characteristics. Not because they're a guy or a girl or whatever. It's the guys. Do not have that command presence. They just don't. They've never spoken. You don't have to shout at people, but you have to speak in a way that people want to listen to you.
And I think.
Can you develop it?
I don't know. So it's personality based, and unfortunately, and this isn't a recent thing, throughout my whole career, lots of really nasty people went for promotion. For whatever reason. I don't know why, because I've never asked them, because I made a habit of never really befriending them. But quite a lot of my colleagues, throughout all ranks, throughout all times, even those who were DOs when I was a sub-officer, so I'm going back a long time ago, were just nasty pieces of work I found. And I found, and that went all the way through. I remember people who were of a similar rank to me, and I can make this very generic because there were so many of us, and they would be uniformly hated by everyone who was around them. And I would think, why have they got to be like that? Because actually, that's hard work. To get up every day and come in and want that level of I'm basically lazy. I want the easiest ride I can. Yeah. Therefore, be nice to people, treat them like adults. They will respond to that. Get your mission values across, and that sounds really, mission values of LFB. Steve's mission values as being a public servant in the fire service for a long period of time. This is what we're here to do. Let's do it properly. So why are you doing the inventories? Because at 3 o'clock in the morning, you want that bit of equipment to be there. And why are you not going to leave that rusty saw in the half kit? Because it's poor practice, and it shows you're not match fit.
Yeah.
So be that firefighter, and me and you will never have conflict.
I sometimes feel like the reason sometimes you get some of the nasty ones really go for it is the desire for power can sometimes be stronger than the desire to do good. It's a little bit like if we were both racing to Scotland and we saw somebody in need. The person with the stronger values is probably going to tell you what, I'm going to stop here and just do this for 5 minutes, and the other person will just plough on, and they'll get there first.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think there's an aspect of that. Doing the right thing isn't always the quickest and the most efficient method. So sometimes I think you do see those who are more self-focused of just rather than the needs of the wider organisations. Yeah. I feel like that desire for power sometimes falls. That's why every time I see somebody who I think's got great character, great values, I really try and give them a massive push, because I'm like, And they're like, nah, mate, it's not really my sort of thing. Everyone's a bit of a dick who goes for that sort of thing. And I'm like, I know, but the thing is, if you don't go for it, all of the dicks will go for it. Yeah. So if none of the good ones go for it, we're going to be working for all of them. Yeah. So that's why I think the people that want it the least should do it the most. Often is the irony. There's some amazing leaders that sit on the back of fire engine their whole career.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the best people I know are firefighters or were firefighters. There's not many left. I think one of my last real good mates who stayed a firefighter, very clever guy, come out of accountancy into the fire brigade in his early 20s, just retired. Fantastic, highly motivated, principled firefighter. Even as much as even in his last weeks, he would still say to the trainees, come on, me and you are going to go downstairs and do knots and lines. When do you even hear that anymore? I mean, he was outstanding, so much so that at his retirement, he's old, me as his former station officer and former station commander, former borough commander, I went to his presentation. The current borough commander gave him a presentation. His old governor did the station officer from after me, but one of his longest serving station officers did a speech, and he was universally recognised as being like an outstanding firefighter. And I used to get into arguments with him. We lived nearby, we see each other quite a lot, and he would never go for promotion. It used to really frustrate me. I said, Paul, because you will be such a brilliant officer, because you command people to respect, you've got ability, you've got empathy, you've got all of those skills to a degree better than me. I say you're much better station officer than I was, because you really have got more of those qualities than I had. I would say,
don't think of it as being in charge of the people. I think think of it as having a greater influence on more people. Because when you're one great firefighter, you might have a great influence on 10 or 12 people, or maybe 20 people if you've got a big watch. But if you do choose to do a different role, don't think of it as going up in the world or anything like that. Just do a different role in your service. You could influence more people. And it's almost a bit of a disservice if you don't give that to the more people. Because I'm like, how many times do you speak to somebody like that individual and say, God, so-and-so would be good if they spoke to you. So-and-so really benefit from hearing what you've got to say. And they're like, but they never will, because that person will never leave that watch or that whatever. And I'm like...
And he did that all his time on one watch. And Poplar, the white watch at Poplar, if he hears this, he'll know he is, and he knows how deeply, well thought of he is. But a real, such a shame that he knows. We've had arguments walking down the street drunk after a night out, where he's walked past his house from the tube station halfway towards my house, because his house is nearer, on the route to my house. You pass his house, and he's walked past his house, still arguing with me about why he's not going to get promoted, and he won because he's retired now. And he retired as a firefighter. But I've known, unfortunately, and a lot on social media, in like your Facebook retirees groups, people slag off senior officers, and I bite on that all the time because I'm quite sensitive to that. But actually, sometimes you think, there were more than a fair few who were on a power trip, or maybe, and that's unfortunate, because a lot of those probably might not have been. Some were good fire officers, fireground officers, who were not very nice people. Others were not very nice people, and actually not that warm on the fireground either. And that's the worst of both worlds. You can forgive a good fireground commander if he's a little bit, and I can think of personalities who were pretty good at what they did, but they were poor leaders and poor managers. But I can think of lots who weren't actually that warm operationally, and liked to. And so basically, it was always a rush to get to the end of in more modern times, get the end of a development period. Didn't say, right, I'm developed in this role now. It's time to put in the application for the next rank, and that happened quite a lot towards the end of my career.
Even faster now.
People
are moving fast
and
now.
It was shocking. Like literally, there were a number of senior officers that I were aware of, and again, no names, no pack drill, but literally as soon as they got their development record signed off, were when's the group managers coming out, or when's the DAX coming out? Calm down. You don't even know this job yet.
Yeah.
100%. And I'm not saying that because I spent half of my career as a senior officer, and arguably I could have gone. A lot of people said, becoming an ADO in your 30s with 33 with 15 years in the job, I could have gone, but all I did was 8 years as ADO and 8 years as a DO or station commander, group commander, whatever you want to call them. But it suited me. Yeah. And by the time I could have thought about it, then the pension changed so much that you got all of those lifetime allowances that it would have meant that I would have been, quite a lot of my colleagues who went above me ended up paying massive tax bills because they got promoted late on in their career.
Okay.
No regrets, actually. Sometimes you think, oh, yeah, it would have been nice to have had an ACO's pension, but I really enjoyed all of it. Yeah. So I've got no
when you went for one of your first ones, I remember reading in your book around, I think it was one of your first temporary promotions, you were involved with a rescue from a man from a live electricity pylon.
Yes, yeah.
Just expand on that one, because for anybody that's never been to a job like that, I've never been to a job like that. So that'd be quite a tricky thing to be faced with.
Yeah, it was just before Christmas '89. There I go with the dates and times again. I was in charge of Poplar's TL, so I was at Poplar. I was acting up on my own watch. Temporary lead hand, and I was in charge of the TL. Because
acting up on your own watch can be hard.
Yeah, it can be, but they were good,
Yeah.
And we got turned out to a man on pylon, something like that, in Leytonstone. So it was on Leytonstone's ground in East London, but the district was Wanstead. It was like where the M11 starts, actually, at the very beginning of the M11 in East London. It was to one side, a big electricity pylon. So we've worked our way up, heard no messages. We got one message, man on pylon, request CEGB or whoever they were called at the time. And then we pulled in off of the main road into this suburban house full of semi-detached houses, down to the end, waved into a school field, and this guy's up on a pylon about 130 foot. And he's sitting upright. And my driver said, he's dead. You're going to have to go and pick him off. He's dead. Look at him. Look, he's sat up, bolt upright. The power's gone for him. He's dead. He wasn't. He was. He'd had a mental breakdown. They thought at the time he was a local man who'd gone missing overnight. So this is where the story gets quite funny. So we pulled the TL in. Leytonstone station officer said, I don't think your TL was high enough, but go up and see if you can make contact with him. Yeah. The police have said he's Michael, he's a local man who went missing last night. He was sitting up the pylon, having fun with his trousers down, basically, which is why he was sitting on the insulators, like what looked like the curly spring things at the start. How we'd got from the pylon onto the insulators without electrocuting himself on a rainy, them December days where it's really blustery, it's sunny 1 minute, then you get icy rain coming. How none of that had... But I've gone up there, I'm at 100 foot, so I'm 30 foot below him. I'm shouting through the loud hailer, Michael, God knows what I'm trying to get his attention. Yeah. Michael, are you okay? Are you this? Are you that? Looked at me. Strange boy shouting at me. Come back down the TL. No good, he's not doing anything. Yeah, we don't think he is now. We now actually know who he is. He's escaped from University College Hospital in central London overnight. Made his way randomly out here, probably on a train, gone randomly walking, found himself randomly at the bottom of a pylon and climbed up it. So no wonder he's looking around him. He's thinking, who's this Michael they're calling for? He was someone else. But long and the short of it, they got a RAF helicopter in, and they said, if he was at the top of the pylon, great. Yeah. Pluck him off.
I was going to say, the downdraft on a helicopter, throw him off.
Well, but potentially, yeah. But I mean, straight away, as the helicopter landed, old Yellow Sea King, the RAF guys come a lot, and they were like, nothing we can do. He's part way up, he's 2/3 of up the pylon. Entanglement, winds, everything. None of it's going to happen, let alone him falling off. Theoretically, they could have plucked him from the top, but not halfway down. So eventually the CEGB, the supply was off, but it needed earthing out from however many tens of thousands.
So even going up on like a TL or an Alp or anything like that, maybe worried about arcing at some point.
Well, maybe they would today, but at the time, so this is where it goes on. Our TL broke down, and realistically, I should have got back in the cab and gone back, but I'm invested in this rescue now. So the CEGB guy and the ADO on the job, there was a DO in charge of it by then, or monitoring it, an ADO who was in charge of it. The guy from the electricity board were going to go up and try and get him, and then me, why me? Because I've already been up there.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
I've made that, I've invested. And
mate, I'd be walking around with a harness on, just ready to be like, as soon as anybody blinks that someone's going up, I'll be like, yeah, me.
Harness, you laugh. But, and a firefighter from Leighton. So 4 of us got the job of the CEGB guy and the ADO went up. So the PPE was, don't wear your helmet, there's no point. Because if you fall off, you're dead. Take your leggings off, because at the time we'd gone over to the new Nomex tunics, but we still had yellow wet legs. If you'd wet legs, so the only way up is through they're 2-inch bolts. Would I do it today? Probably not. I don't know where my fear levels were at the time, but when I think back at it, I think, really? They are just, if you look on the side of, they're like 2-3-inch bolts that stick out the side of pylons. They're set at oblique angles to each other, and you use them as your hand and foothold. So the TL, Lambeth's TL, which had turned up, so again, I should have been away. My driver was furious. He's rolling up his cigarettes, smoking them, and mumbling under his breath, looking at me and calling me all sorts of names. But we went up part of the way up a TL, then we started climbing up. He, at one point, just before that, had shuffled off of the coil things, whatever, the insulators, back along, and at every point, bearing in mind his trousers are still around his knees, at any point you were thinking he's either going to go bang, or he's going to fall, or he's go bang and fall, or he's going to fall. Then he got back to the stanchion, and instead of coming down a straight one, he like it was a firefighter's pole, he slid at an angle down a 45-degree stanchion, still just hanging on.
God, he must have been ripping his bits. Bits.
They got up there. The first 2 got up there, got hold of him. The ADO...
And did what?
Well, they just literally... So the first guy, the CEGB guy was upstairs. He got hold of him. He partially pulled his trousers up. And then the ADO come up and sort of half pulled his trousers up, tried to secure him. And then literally holding on around him. Because there was no things as harnesses or line rescue then. They gradually passed him down. And then he came down to Jeff, who'd somehow got in front of me, I think, or Jeff had gone up in front of me, and then I ended up with him. So, and again, I can't tell you how I did it, because my memory of the specifics are that essentially I had to hold on with every hand and every foot, but was pushing him against the pylon.
We do live walk downs.
Having to hold these bolts. But it worked. And then until we got to the point at which... So the TL couldn't get right to the base of the... So it wasn't just 30 foot, because the TL was parked in a bit on the best hard standing, which was about 50 foot away. So therefore the TL had to be elevated lower to extend across the gap. So it was probably... The TL was probably about 60 foot. Yeah. So we had probably about 60 foot to come down, and Alf and the guy, I won't say,
it's a fair way to go, isn't it?
But came down, and basically I had the last bit of him trying to pull his trousers, hold his trousers up, hold on with hands and feet, push him against the feet. If he'd at any point, he was passive. Basically, if he at any point would have decided to push against me, we'd have both gone. Yeah,
and that's it. When we did live carry-ons when I first started joining, I'm like, I'm quite a big guy. I've got long arms.
Yeah.
But we used to train with some of the girls and stuff, and they'd look a walk down with me, and I'm like, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
This is ridiculous. If I just kick you backwards, let alone...
Everyone's
and I was
gone,
like, but what the heck? This is not right. It just felt like... And I know there was no real alternative, but you're just like...
Yeah, but you look at it from today's point of view and think, like... I mean, for the guys in the DO in charge, I mean, it was our lives. The DO in charge must have been sitting there counting, because if I was in charge, I'd be thinking, they're going to die.
Yeah.
They're going to die. But maybe the attitude at the time, well, like I said, 1989, attitudes were different, maybe.
Yeah.
Now you'd want, line rescue belts. Or, I don't know enough about line rescue to use all the equipment, but I know there would be all sorts of different hooks and pulley systems set up, and... it would be completely different to what that was. But there you go, we did it.
I wanted to go into asking you about some of because as you sort of move through the ranks, you ended up being, over that sort of 30-year period, present at some pretty significant incidents. And I just wanted to sort of try and summarise and capture some of the stuff. Again, all of this is only to the best of your recollection, but you attended some pretty incredible stuff, and I'd love to hear what it was like when you're at things like, I mean, for example, I remember we were speaking before about some of the IRA bombings at Canary Wharf. What stage in your career would you have been at when those sorts of things were happening?
So that was around the time I was, there was a number in the mid-90s that went from when I was firefighter to firefighter acting up to temporary sub-officer. The big one that I attended, the Canary Wharf bomb, was when I was temporary sub-officer at Borough. And bizarrely, I lived just towards the eastern edge of London at the time, and I was on the phone to my friend who still lived in Poplar, where we lived, and we was having a conversation about something or the other, and he went, "Effing hell!" I went, "What?" And then before he could answer again, that was about 10 miles away from Canary Wharf I lived. In that time he went, "Effing hell," I heard this rumble come down my street. My street went run east to west.
Yeah.
So it started off at one end, literally the rumble of the explosion 10 miles away, rumbled down the street, getting louder, went past our house, shook all the windows and disappeared off like a roll of thunder. And then I went, "Christ, heard that. Was that a bomb?" He said, "Yeah," but literally he's nearer the scene, these windows. I said, "All right, I've got to go. I better ring my mum and dad," who lived quite near to him. Rung my mum and dad, and hello. I said, "Oh, it's a bomb. What's happened?" "Don't know, Steve. There's a big bomb. It must be that everything lit up. All the windows have shaken. Everyone's out in the street looking." But anyway, that was the Canary Wharf bomb. That was the breaking of the IRA ceasefire on a Friday night. And Poplar at the time turned out to it on spec. It was on that bit of Canary Wharf was on Millwall's ground, but the call, because the explosion moved in a southwesterly direction because of the buildings, lots of the initial calls came in from across the river in Deptford. But Poplar and Millwall turned out to it, and really bizarrely, I remember seeing it the next day. But if you turned east and walked 100 yards up the road, it was as if nothing had happened.
Really?
But if you stood at the scene and looked west, everywhere you could see, as far as you are concerned, there wasn't a window in the building, and buildings were blown over. Yet, some little light industrial units, which is all great big tower blocks now. So Canary Wharf had been built. It hadn't expanded as it was now. So part of that Dockland zone was still like lightweight industrial buildings that had sort of printers and car dealers and all that in them. More like a traditional industrialist. Like some of them were blown flat, and yet 100 yards in the other direction, nothing was there. But anyway, went on. So that night happened. It was on Sky News, and the local crews attended it. I was at Bow at the time, which was the next station north of Poplar. Turned up for duty, and lo and behold, as expected, just after 9 o'clock, we got relief onto the scene. Originally, I got given the really lousy job of being inner cordon controller because I was a temporary sub-officer. So the police had the outer control. Then at the inner cordon, I had the inner cordon control. Thankfully, the relief of command units came on, and a command unit officer took that. But we ended up in the shop where there were two people missing. There was what was a newsagent shop, a very narrow newsagent shop, a little bit like this room, long but quite narrow. I remember it because, it was in our area. I knew it well. The walls were gone. The big concrete frame of the building still remained. All the internal walls were gone. And the over at one side of what was now blown from that shop into, I think, an Abbey National Building Society. So all the internal walls had blown down. There was all of the rubble from the outside and then the rubble from the inside, all pushed up to one. So you had where the lorry had blown up, and there was a crater.
It was a big explosion,
truck,
wasn't it? Yeah.
So you had a crater where the lorry had blown up. Then you had the edge of the building where the newsagent shop was, and we were now. So that was effectively an empty space.
Yeah.
What was bizarre was in one things you remember little things in one corner. Was, like the tall drinks fridges with all the lemonade and coke in they have in the newsagent shop. That was still intact. The window had gone, but the explosion had crystallised all of the carbonated drinks. So they were like...
weird.
Exploded, but then crystallised in midair. So all of these, the cans and bottles at the back of the fridge were right. All of those at the front were sort of split apart, but then as if someone had frozen them midair. Really weird, And it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't like ice. It was like like a crystallised sticky one. It is, you spill lemonade, it's very sticky.
Glycerol stuff.
But that, whatever the chemistry of the explosion had done that,
surreal.
That they'd blown apart, but the heat had instantly frozen them, but not frozen them in ice, captured them. So that was a really bizarre thing, and there were but basically we had a pile of rubble, and there was some damage to the wall of the last wall that indicated.
What was the USAR kind of scenario about? Because I know a lot of that didn't come around till the New Dimensions project.
No, you're right. I think there was I think Battersea Fire Station at the time, which is one of our USAR stations now.
Yeah,
they had a rescue unit, so we always had fire rescue.
Did they shore
units.
stuff back then? Were they into?
I don't think they did. So Battersea had things like, so we'd had in around 84 before I joined, there was the Putney explosion, which was a block of flats that blew up and killed lots of people.
Yeah.
Posh block of flats in Putney, and that was all hands. And as a result of that, of hand digging for people, they began to bring technology in like snake eye cameras and all of that. But that was about the limit of it. There was one station that had some equipment to find buried people.
Yeah.
The technology around shoring up didn't exist, and this is 96, so this is only.
We say technology though, back in the war when they were, doing
so,
trench, securing, stopping those collapses.
The ability. So we'd lost
that
that
skill.
thought
process, even to think, okay, this might fall again, or it might have a secondary collapse. So what could we do in the interim? And it's kind of where that kind of like your dad, my dad, that building mindset meets the emergency services. And if it's that dangerous, should we even be here? But there's rescues to be carried out, or there's work that needs to be done. But none of that was really we just hadn't got there yet.
Yeah, and I think it had been a lost skill. So there were heavy rescue squads in World War II that were separate from the fire brigade. They were separate. We certainly
especially
didn't
after we'd had all the war and the bombings and stuff. You'd have thought
that was a lost art then. 45 years after the war, or 55 years after the war, whenever that, or after the Blitz, whenever that was, that had been a lost art. So we were, basically, it seemed obvious from some marks on the wall where we thought the people were. And again, so as not to distress people who might know people. I won't go into detail of that, but we basically end up with a pile of rubble, and we started digging through it. And fortunately for us, unfortunately, we
can't really identify bodies. You're just finding bits of people.
Yeah, we
usually.
were relieved just before we got, because I remember speaking to the sub officer from Stratford who turned up to relieve us, and I said, I think we're nearly there. We're 3 foot into that pile. We must be nearly there. And I think Mick rung me later on to say, literally, as they got back to work, within 2 or 3 minutes, they uncovered the first person and the second person. But yeah, that was like fairly shocking. And I think all of the fire alarms, all of the burglar alarms, were going off in all of the premises around. And if I watch a news clip from that now, you get the sound of those alarms instantly takes me back there. It was just like this wailing of burglar alarms and fire alarms, and bells ringing and
everywhere.
All of that. Yeah, and that was a fairly.
Was it just before you joined when they had the big? It was just before you joined the King's Crossfire, wasn't it?
That was my first day duty.
Was it your first day?
Yeah.
You didn't go though.
Didn't go because I was on days. That was the night. I was on Blue Watch. Red Watch came on duty at 6, and that happened about 7 o'clock. But I was the only person.
You were in the service during that time. What was it like? What happened?
Yeah,
during
it was. I don't know.
It was a hell of an investigation.
Yeah,
I actually want to cover that as one of our debriefs. I need to find the documents for it because it's all public knowledge
now.
The
report's really good. Yeah, there's a couple of big report documents. I think I've got one of the reports in my loft. The London Fire Brigade version of the report. But yeah, that had a big. So that happened. I was the only person in my training squad who got posted onto Blue Watch. So therefore I was the only person who started on that day. All the rest of my training squad had either started already.
Yeah.
So those on the Red and the White Watch had already started on days or nights. And the couple who went on to the Green Watch were yet to start on the Friday. So I was the only person who started on the Wednesday. So I came off duty, having had my first fire where I ran out for those. Went down the pub with my mate. Didn't go to our regular, which was on the main road. We went to my dad's local, which was at the back of Poplar on the High Street. So might have seen all the fire engines, but didn't. So came home, went to bed. The following morning, my dad got
What was the
up.
turnout for that? Do you remember?
It was 30 pump fire, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so...
That's just obscene, isn't it?
yeah. And
I always think, like, and as much as the Grenfells and stuff are horrible and stuff like that, there's something about basements, underground cellars, petrifying when you think of that, and especially the interconnecting from the wind and airflow aspect and pressurization, and similar to how we think of lifts and stuff like that. That is a scary thought. I can't imagine what it must have been like.
Yeah, I mean,
for crews there looking down into that. It must have been like looking into hell.
Yeah, well,
because just the ferocity of it.
Over the years, I got to know quite a lot of people who were there, because time moves on and you go on different watches, and you knew a lot of people. And people said crews were having to go in at the time. We had noble branches, which were a solid core branch, but you had an openable ring on them that put out a spray. They were having to have that on to get down there, and then they were having to have jets played on them to keep them cool. So there's people at the top putting water on the firefighters going into the tunnel behind this cone. But yeah, they did. I mean, they did a spectacular job. They rescued quite a lot of people. But it was a brutally hot incident.
And I mean, and I'm not. I don't. It's probably not right for either of us to comment on what the subways are like that now. But I'm like, there's still a lot of old stuff down there.
Yeah,
I always get worried if we've really learnt all the lessons, and if there's ever enough money to try and change a system like that. It's so old.
The improvement as a result of that was because there've been lots of fires up to that point, but not many people killed. So again, 3 years before that, in 1984, Oxford Circus had been potentially an even worse fire because it was down on a platform.
Yeah.
Between two tunnel, a storeroom basically. So you've got the two tube, the ingoing and outgoing platforms. One of the alleyways between them was being used as a builder's store, all on fire, caused massive heat damage. The crews really, and that was worse because they had to go right the way down. I think it was Piccadilly line platform from Oxford Circus. That started it, but London Underground, according to the report, didn't really learn the lessons from that. So although smoking had been stopped on trains, you could still smoke on the station. So what they think caused the fire on the wooden escalator was someone got onto the escalator, lit their cigarette, threw their match down. Yeah. And that's where we ended
Similar
up.
to what, like football stadiums and stuff like that, underneath those stalls and underneath those, you just got to think it's got some shit everywhere.
What always worries me is there were improvements at the time massively.
Yeah.
Because, 31 people died and there was an inquiry and lots of people. I mean, not everything worked well because I know for certain that the radios that we were meant to get improved back then in 87 still weren't in place by 2005 when 7/7 happened.
Wow.
And still they're being referred to now as a result of the Grenfell Tower fire 30 years after King's Cross. The radios are not good enough. The technology of the radios, the handheld radios, the walkie-talkies are not good enough. Arguably, the digital airwave sets that senior officers use would work on open channels, but there isn't the will or the investment, the money to give everyone one of those. I know every police officer has one, but because they're doing different comms to us, aren't they? But basically, senior officers have got them, and the fire engines have got them in a fixed set. No individuals have got them, so comms were a big issue. But yeah, it's been 34, 35, 36 years now since King's Cross. 35 this year, actually, 35 years this year. Times have moved on. Everyone's forgot about it. Could it happen again?
That's the scary, isn't it? Yeah.
There's not a lot of money about. Our corners being cut. And how long are you away from your next King's Cross? Probably not on an escalator, but a very serious underground fire in London.
With the complacency that we have, and things happen in cycles as well. We take our eye off the ball with certain things. Yeah. You mentioned there about the 7/7. So you'd move into a divisional officer position by that point?
I was station commander, I was at the rank of assistant divisional officer as it was then. And I was station commander at Homerton then.
What effect did the 7/7 have on the sector? Because, again, it was a real first for something like that.
Before 9/11, there was a major exercise, a major counter-terrorism exercise in London at Bank Station. Trump card, I think.
Yeah, I've got it written down somewhere.
Yeah,
you'll know it better than me.
Yeah, it might have been Operation Trump card. I can't be certain. What it's a little bit chicken and egg with all of this. So this was just before 9/11, I think. As a little bit, then 9/11 happened, and I think it was a little bit of a hurry up. We better get something done about this.
Yeah.
So as a result of that exercise and 9/11, we had these multi-agency initial assessment teams come out, MIAT, in London. So they were based at the old Fire Brigade headquarters, and they were basically working 12 4-hour shifts. A couple of fire officers with CBRN hazmat training, a couple of ambulance officers, and some police officers who went out as a multi-agency team responding to terror attacks. After 9/11, we had
Was this before Nilo's?
Nilo's had just started as well.
Okay.
So Nilo's had just come about.
As I know,
so
Nilo's, Jessip's.
So Nilo's, what basically come down, whether Operation Trump card and what had happened at 9/11 when no one spoke to each other, and the history of that, someone from the time
Manchester bombings
would be, someone from the time
unforgivable by that time.
But basically, as a result of 9/11 where no one spoke to each other on the ground, and our own Operation Trump card, which may have predated 9/11, I can't be certain, but basically all three organisations worked in silos. Police didn't want to talk to anyone, ambulance wanted to do casualties, fire wanted to do their thing, no one spoke to each other. That's where
it's not funny, but
that's where the original ILO, it weren't a national right, it was Interagency Liaison Officer. That's where that idea came, where the police said, right, some of your officers will get them security cleared. Then anytime we've got this again, we know we've got a number of trusted people, security cleared, we can tell them a few secrets that will allow you to better plan your operations to this. Mm-hmm. Same with ambulance. So as a result of that, the spin-off of that with these multi-agency teams, and just after we had all the anthrax hoaxes after 9/11, didn't we? Mm-hmm. All the white powder incidents. Mm-hmm. So effectively, what's come out of MIAT is the police in London have got their own. I can't remember their name, but they've got their own sort of CBRN hazmat teams. Yeah. You've got Heart which came out of it, and then nationally we've now got the DIM teams in the fire service, haven't we?
Yes.
CBRN
Detection Identification Monitoring teams. Yeah.
That all came out of the.
They're part of national resilience.
Yeah, that is all part of national resilience. Yeah. So then come mass decontamination units, high volume. I
think all that's gone now.
Well, yeah, it's sort of there.
I think it reached the end of its shelf life, and I'm not sure we renewed it.
No, we didn't, no, because all of those vehicles...
It was all the New Dimensions project, and we spent a lot of money.
2003.
I'm glad we didn't need to use it all, but I think a lot of it never got used.
Yeah, no, I mean, I know lots of people, Cole Haslam is a national... he's one of the... specialist on HVP specialist.
Carl will be coming on. Yeah. He's on my hit list. Yeah, he's on my hit list.
He does. He's a national TAC advisor for flooding and such like. So they still
He'll be more than one episode. I've got a feeling he's got a wealth of knowledge, this man.
He's got we've used HVPs nationally at floodings, but in London we use them for big fires.
High volume pumps.
Yeah, high volume pumps we use for big fires. USAR, that capability is pretty still on those old vehicles, but that is sort of been absorbed by London now. And as far as I
think it's popular in London. Like, I was speaking to some operators the other week, and they said they're really struggling for USAR operators in London because when you get the skill set, they don't let you move around very much because not as many people want to be techies, for want of a better description. So they're like screaming out for USAR operators now. People don't want to do it.
There are 14...
I love it. It's all right, scream. Maybe I'm a weirdo. Maybe I'll grow out of it. I don't know.
There are 14 fire rescue unit stations in LFB. So 14 stations have got what we call fire rescue units, which are emergency tenders. Yeah. They've all got different skills. So I think 3 of those... East Ham, Edmonton and Battersea.
I know Edmonton and Battersea. I don't really know much of East Ham.
East Ham's out my way. They are the 3 USAR stations. I might be wrong. There might be a 4th, but the ones I definitely know are Edmonton, East Ham and Battersea are the 3 USAR stations. Yeah. And then others are line and water rescue stations and other are hazmat FRU stations. So each have got their core capability.
And then Lambeth obviously sits by itself as a
CBRN, nothing to do with a rescue unit. Yeah, the rescue units are watch-based, so they are like a longer fire engine with 4 lockers instead of 3, full up with rescue kit and no hose. Yeah. So whatever you call them, They used to be called emergency tenders decades ago, and they were across the country. Most people put that capability on their pumping appliances, didn't they, over the last 3 or 4 decades. But in London, you've still got bespoke fire rescue units that have got extended duration BA and all of the rescue kit plus their specific capability. So they've all got, everyone will go to car and train crashes, but you will get specialist hazmat, water line rescue or USAR ones. But all of that really, and ILOs are and then the ILO capability is now national. All of that came out.
So that came around that sort of same time.
Yeah.
So when that happened, then what was the initial reaction from the service, and how was it dealt with? I think
everyone, a lot of firefighters and watch-based crews didn't know much about it.
No.
A lot of senior officers at the time saw them as the secret squirrel club. I think some of the personalities involved in it, obviously you've been pulled in by really important people in the police. You've been given a trusted role. And I think it would be fair to say on reflection, a number of people in the LFB at the time took themselves a little bit too seriously with the secrecy of it. Can't tell you.
Made them feel special.
Yeah. And that's personality driven.
Can't talk about it.
Yeah.
Can't talk about
it. Yeah, no, literally. It was like that.
Who do you think I'm going to tell?
Yeah.
The Daily Mail?
Some of the people I worked with who were ILOs before NILOs were good as gold about it. You know, my boss, when I was, before I got promoted to group manager, my boss, who was my Borough Commander when I was Station Commander, he was an ILO and he was fantastic. You know, he didn't spill the beans, but you know, he used to say, "Oh, those idiots," you know, talking like. So they got a bad.
You used to see that sometimes with union reps as well, and union reps were the worst gossips in the world. Yeah. Bloody buggers.
Yeah. But that grew. I mean, that grew over the course of the first 4 years without anything happening. So 2001, 2005. 7/7 happened, and that group really did. They come to their fore then, because you know although 7/7 was a bit, there was an inquiry after 7/7, and everyone was found wanting to a degree. But the interagency liaison worked a lot better there. People knew people by then, and people were talking to people. You know, there was some argument about because we go onto the tube tracks to carry out rescues properly, reasonably quickly. We'll do things like double confirmation that the current's off, and then put isolating bars down. Well-meaning ambulance and police staff just went running onto the tracks. They got away with it, but LFB was seen as being almost reluctant to go and rescue people. The spin in the media at the time, because it wasn't long after the dispute. You
see that a lot of water rescues and all that sort of stuff, and then you only need especially like places like Thames, you only need one police officer getting whipped underneath the current and drowning,
and then
and they have the heroism act and all that sort of thing. Like but wind your neck in a little bit. We don't not want to do the job. We've just seen what happens when we don't put these provisions in place.
Yeah, and that was probably the bad time. I mean, at the time it seemed to work well, but I know from the inquiry a couple of years later there were, and again the those in the press who, the client media, as James O'Brien calls them, who wanted to give the fire brigade a kick in, gave the fire brigade a kick in, almost saying like the fire brigade couldn't be bothered to go down there, they were too worried about health and safety. But that weren't the case. The fact was, double confirmed
and he knew
the
that
occurrence of
that was a bit cheeky.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
You actually were an ILO during the Mark Dugan attack.
Yes, I was. Yeah.
Was that the first time you'd really stepped into the role?
Well, that was the first that I hadn't been in the role long. That was the first major incident I dealt with. So yeah, I'd been an ILO pretty much that year, 2010.
For anybody that don't remember who Mark Dugan was, give us a whistle-stop tour of what that particular incident was, because it was big.
Mark Duggan lived in Tottenham on the Broadwater Farm estate, which had been the scene of the 1985 riots. There was the relationship between the police and the community in that area has always been fractious anyway. It's never been particularly good. Mark Duggan was being followed by firearms police, and allegedly they had intel that he was going to collect a gun, or he had a gun on him. And the record would state, and it's never been clear, because the record would state just before they got back to Tottenham, they were following him from somewhere else in East London. Just before they got back to Tottenham, the armed police did a stop on the minicab that he was travelling in. Allegedly, he got out of the car, and I'll say allegedly because I can only go on what the police.
People can go on Google and find their own decisions.
So effectively, He got out of the car and reached for the gun and was shot as a result of that by the police. The other side said he threw a gun, or that he threw a gun and that's why they shot him. The other side are saying he never had a gun with him, and they've had all of these really detailed forensic examiners and forensic animators look at projection angles. And the reason I say allegedly, because you'll never know. I weren't there.
No.
But, there's as big as argument to say he didn't have a gun to say he did have a gun, and the gun was placed by the police. I think that's unlikely, but that's my personal opinion. But as a result, I've
worked with enough officers, and I don't know there are some really bad ones out there. You see some of the stuff that's happening in America a minute, and again, we only get a filtered version of what's happening in America. But I'm just like, I don't see many malicious people getting into the job and doing things. I think there might be the odd rare one out there, but
I know lots of.
Imagine how petrifying it is as well for police officers.
I know
with all the weapons that are on the streets now.
Yeah,
I wouldn't do it.
No,
scary.
I know lots of firearms cops because we did a lot of training with them in LFB, the NILO group in particular, and to a man and woman, they all seem good people, very professional, like the best of the bunch, really. Going on to that, so I've got my own opinions on it, and but it is what it is.
The aftermath of that.
So the aftermath was on the Friday they expected trouble. There was a big birthday party, and a community centre in Tottenham they expected trouble. No trouble occurred. On the Saturday, it was decided that there was going to be no trouble. And some of the senior staff who were on duty in the police were off duty, left Tottenham Police Station with, I believe, a chief inspector in charge. A crowd turned up wanting to speak to someone senior for a police, were told there was no one available. And things were going on in the background, but basically an element of the crowd started misbehaving, started breaking things, set light to a police car, set light to a bus, and then we had a riot. And that riot went on all of that night for a mile up Tottenham High Road, and then carried on until Tuesday.
It was different massive, though, wasn't it? Again, people can look at some of the images on Google.
Yeah, I mean,
I think it was a massive, the just sheer destruction.
Yeah, well,
that had gone on in that street. It was like a war zone.
Yeah, I got called. I was off duty, but on a recall duty, so I got called about 10 o'clock at night. Pages went off, ringing to the NILO group. Where are you? How quick can you be ready? Great, go up to Edmonton Fire Station. That's the forward mobilising point. So what they did, all of Tottenham High Road on an ever-expanding length was basically the procedure we have in LFB. They've probably got it in lots of other brigades. Forward mobilising procedure. If you've got something going on in an area, then you take a command unit to a nearby fire station and you run it as your own little fire brigade. So lots of fire engines parked at Edmonton Fire Station, which is a big fire station with lots of...
And that almost acts as like, depending on the level, like tactical or strategic command from there.
So basically all 999 calls coming in were forwarded to the command unit, and then we made a decision, are we going to attend? So there was a group manager there making the decision. We will attend, we won't attend. My job there was to go to colleagues on the ground at the riot or at police control room and say, look, we've got this fire. Can we attend or not? Can you give us a route in? And that was effectively our role. Loads of fires come in like cars on fire, rubbish bins. We're not going to attend them. Building fires, we need to get someone down there. Thankfully, it stayed on one road, Tottenham High Road, which is part of the A10, straight line coming out of London. So it was a mile of a straight road, effectively. It made it tactically quite easy to deal with on that first night. About 4 o'clock in the morning, we had a little change around. The ILO who was on the scene was now at a mile of incident and basically couldn't oversee a mile. So I went down there, got off at, and it was really weird because it was like a scene from the Blitz, I imagine, because Tottenham High Road is straight, I could see all the way up it, and all you could see were buildings burning as far as the eye could see. Yeah. It was like the Blitz. It was like looking at a picture of the Blitz, but here I was. And the other weird thing was, every now and again when the riot would stop, before the police pushed them on, you would have sections where there were loads of broken bricks and bottles, and you couldn't walk on that because you would break your ankles.
Yeah.
So you'd go 200 yards where the police had chased the rioters until the point they stopped and then started fighting back.
Yeah.
And that's where you would have all this debris where you had to shuffle along because if you lifted your feet, you would land on a brick and turn your ankle. So you'd walk for 500 yards and then or 200 yards. Then you'd have to shuffle through about 50 yards, kicking the bricks out the way. But it was bizarre because the first place I stopped was there was a pump in the middle of the road. There was a guy who was the driver holding a jet, putting water into a burning building. There was another jet coming off going into a building where there was two young firefighters, a man and a woman. And then I said to the driver, I went, "You all right?" I said, "Where's your governor?" He went, "Oh, he's in there." And then I saw an hose reel going into another shop, and the governor's putting out a bit of fire in the shop. So there was like 3 or 4 buildings alight and just a single pump dealing with
There was some shops and some buildings that didn't get touched, did they?
No, they did. Literally, they passed by.
That's what made me think back to that whole gang aspect or like respect for certain residents. I don't know what it was.
So there were certain businesses that were left alone geographically because they got chased and therefore weren't stopped. But wherever they stopped and fought back, then they set light. But there were. I know there is in that part of London, the Turkish community is very strong. Yeah. Coming back in the morning, walking back after whatever time it had all sort of finished, I went into a Turkish grocer's shop, a big Turkish grocer's shop. Loads of guys working in there, Turkish guys, and they had all their lights on, just blowing a bit of dust off of their front counter. No one had touched that. Whether that was whether that was an unspoken thing or whatever had happened, but they didn't go near that. And the other shops some Turkish
businesses, scary Turks with knives always used to petrify me when we used to go out in certain places. So, and that's not a collective of all of them. There's some incredibly lovely people, but it's interesting when you see those things.
Yeah, but it was amazing. Like I said, I worked up to just before the head of the riot, if that's what you call it. It sounds a right term, the head of the riot. And so we were literally fighting fires on a big corner, the big carpet shop on one corner that we really thought people hadn't got out of because people were sort of fire survival calling, and they were being told get out, and they did, thankfully. But we didn't know because this whole building had just collapsed. It was like a shell. But 200 yards beyond that, you could hear the riot. And at that point, at some point in the night, the riot ended there. And bizarrely, the strangest thing I've ever seen, just before that riot, when it began to quieten down, I was walking. So I'd walked up to the head of the riot to meet with the other ILO, and I started walking back to take account of everything that was going on, where we had crews and all of that, with the ultimate aim of meeting with a police commander back down at the start of the riot. And I stopped a couple of times talking to crews on the way back, and all of a sudden there was police walking back in all their riot gear, and then there was like young fellas with like bandanas on and walking back, and it was as if, and I was, honestly, as bizarre as it sounds, the riot people didn't just run away from the riot and disappear into back streets. It's as if everyone had had enough, and a whistle was blown.
Yeah.
And I know the police went on to arrest a lot of people afterwards, but it's as if no one had the energy. So the rioters were walking back alongside the police who were walking back, literally. And it was the strangest thing I've ever seen. And I'm thinking, like, the horses were coming down, and I'm thinking, these kids have clearly been rioting.
They're involved in it,
yeah. They're covered in dust, and their clothes are ripped, and they look tired, and they've got bandanas that had been used to mask their face and now around their necks. So,
look, we've got you on CCTV. We'll call it a day.
Yeah,
we'll follow this up.
Yeah, but then over the subsequent nights, obviously it spread far and wide. I was in the sun. I went home and had lots of sleep, and then Sunday night I was in the police control room at Lambeth, and then Monday I was out and about and ended up at we had some writers nearer me in Barking had set light to a pub, and it was going on all over London, and we had a big security detail of police, and we were putting the fire out with an ALP and some handheld jets, and then the police inspector came over at me and said, "We've got to go." I said, "What?" He said, "We've got to go to Ealing," which is right the other side from where I am in Barking. It's 20 miles away, but that's 20 miles away across London. Yeah. It's not 20 miles on a motorway. Yeah. That is a long way on blue lights because it's kicked off really badly in Ealing. And I think a member of the public had got killed by a rioter in it. An old boy had come out to protect his premises and had got killed. So that had kicked off, and he basically said, I'll leave you with one serial. So he had about 4 serials, which are a group of police vans with riot police. So a sergeant. He was an inspector in charge of, say, 4 serials.
Yeah.
Each serial had a sergeant and 10 cops on it or whatever, which is 2 vans. I can't remember.
Yeah.
It's not my job to remember that. It's their job. But basically he said, I'll leave you with one serial. What do you need to do? I said, we just need to get rid of the flames, basically. They pretty much were hopping from foot to foot to get away. And we got to the point where it was just smouldering the building. And I said, just go. You want to go, go. We're going to make all our gear up now and we're going to disappear. And there was 2 WPCs from the local police, borough police, who were left there. And I said, look, we're done now. But weirdly, so the first time in my career, we'd actually made up the equipment and left a building smouldering.
Yeah.
Weren't out. You know, you walk away and it's... But the building wasn't going anywhere, but there's still white steam coming out of the roof and everything. And what I said to Barkin was, do a drive-by every hour.
Yeah.
If you need to call us back out, make a running call. And then come 8 o'clock when the world wakes up again, we'll have a proper relief. But actually, they rang me in the morning and said, we drove past, it was okay. We went back about, just our pump ladder and pump went back about 8 o'clock in the morning. And we just stuck a couple of jets through the wall. So it didn't reignite. But it's a really bizarre feeling that because we had to start release because they'd set light to a great big Sony warehouse in North London. They went there to loot it and found that there wasn't much lootable there, so they set light to it. So London and but what was really bizarre was where we would have had. So we estimated in Tottenham on the first night we had about, I think we had. I want to say we had about 40 or 50 pumps worth of fires. So 4 pump fire here.
Wow.
That's a 4, that's a 6, that's a 10. It was a supermarket. That building on the corner was at least a 15 pump fire in London town. So we had 40 or 50 pumps worth. We actually did it with about 19 pumps. No aerials. But just, there's 2 pumps here. You've got a supermarket alight. Can you manage with 2 pumps? Yeah, we'll have to.
Yeah,
but it's a dangerous precedent.
Yes,
because what could that really mean? When you do firefighting properly, you actually need 4, 6 pumps or whatever you've got to get all your safe procedures in.
Yeah,
but it was all hands to the pump. Because we could get no more fire engines there. We had plenty in reserve, but by the Monday night, everything was in good order. Apart from the fact that we ran out of resources because Croydon, Tooting, Lewisham, Peckham, Woolwich, Barking, Tottenham remained quiet. Enfield, the big warehouse, Ealing kicked off. So there were so many big conflagrations that we pretty much emptied LFB out from day to day. And that's a big brigade to empty out. But there were so many big areas. But yeah, interesting times that. And you saw people really against the, young firefighters who were really up for it. Good bit of defensive, old school blitz firefighting. There you go.
And I know we've just had Grenfell and stuff like that, but I feel like we're in that calm before the storm. As much as people will hear and go, "What are you on about?" We've just had freaking Grenfell, one of these big incidents. I'm like, I don't know. I just feel like it's a perfect storm. We've got all these people leaving the emergency services because so much experience is leaving. There'll be something. That means we need to switch on again.
Inevitably, there always is. There always is. We've never gone. I mean, they called the 80s the decade of disaster because you had Marchioness, King's Cross, Clapham, in Bradford, Hillsborough. Decade of disaster, wasn't it? It was the Zeebrugge ferry, albeit that happened near Belgium, but it involved a lot of British people, train crashes,
When was the incident on the Thames where that...
Marchioness.
That was Marchioness, wasn't it?
Yeah.
89, I was going to say. That was a scary one. I was down there the other week chatting with somebody and looking at all the chains, and that's when they first put all the chains around all the edges of the bridge columns, wasn't it? So that when people are falling in or jumping in, they can sort of self-rescue and hang on, because people forget the Thames is tidal. And it got a hell of a bloody current underneath the surface. It'll whip you away fast.
That was really bizarre the night of the Marchioness. So it was I just transferred from Bethnal Green to Poplar, Red Watch. And I was because
there's only one station that covers the Thames. People don't know that. There's only it's Lambeth, isn't it?
Right. So there is only
two fireboats on it.
There's only one river fire station. Although every station that borders the Thames has got half of the Thames as part of their ground, but they haven't got a boat.
Yeah.
So there's only one river fire station, but of course every fire station that borders it, which is plenty all the way along, Wennington, Dagenham, Barking, East Ham, Silvertown ain't there anymore, Poplar, Millwall, Shadwell. I could go on right the way through London, and that's just north of the Thames, and then south of the Thames. So you get half of the river on your patch. Where your bit of the map overlaps the river, you get half of the river. So at Poplar,
What's the expectation though in terms of their capability?
well,
just because they
not a lot really,
throw
but it's your
lines
ground,
and whatever.
So we go there and we basically watch. Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
throw
what
line,
I'm saying,
but
yeah.
ship fires and all of that, and that's what happened at Marchioness. It was really bizarre because I was in the watch room, so we have like the duty person basically. Still have. I don't know if they did fill out the logbook. I think the logbook's gone. But 6 o'clock and 9 o'clock in the morning, you sit in the watch room. You're the duty person for the day. You fill out the logbook. Fireman Dudeney on duty in the watch room.
Who's there?
Red
Who's
watch.
riding? Yeah,
Yeah, who's riding? All of that.
runners and riders.
So that meant at the time you had to sleep in the watch room in the office. So my bizarre introduction to the Marchioness. That was a year. That was just before, and I mean months before, they brought out the first of the fleets that had extending floodlights.
Ah, okay.
One station in southeast London, Bexley, had been trialling them, and my local station where I lived, Hornchurch, had been trialling them. Yeah. So it was East India Dock Road, where Poplar Fire Station is a noisy old road. You never slept properly in the watch room anyway.
Okay.
So I'm laying there and I can hear sirens coming, and I thought, two tones. Most of the ambulance still had two tones. Police had gone to sirens, and I thought, that sounds like a fire engine. I just know the tone. I thought, well, we're in. Mm-hmm. We've got a TL, so it ain't an aerial. Who's coming past? And I've got up, and just so I can hear this coming, looked out the watch room window, and I've seen a pump go past Hornchurch, and I went, Hornchurch? And my first thought was, someone has stolen Hornchurch's from miles away, like 15 miles away out where I live.
Yeah.
Someone has stolen Hornchurch's pump,
Belting it down.
and they're belting it down the A13 into London. Then the teleprinter went off, and
I'd have worried that the teleprinter broken, or I'd done something
wrong.
wrong.
Done something wrong.
I'd be like, oh shit, I'm never going to live this down. I'd be
Oh God, everyone's still in the fire station. But I went to the printer come up, and then it said major incident progress, major incident procedure, which is a London specific thing. Major incident procedure in false.
Yeah.
Ship turned over it. So then I thought,
bloody hell.
Why Hornchurch? Then I remembered reading something about Hornchurch had these floodlights, which every fire engine's got now, but at the time. Then the bells went down, and I'm on the pump ladder with the watch room. I went up, before the bells went down, I went up to my sub-officer up in the sub-officer's dorm. The governor was off, woke him up. Paul, what? Major incident procedure on the Thames. Boat's gone down. He said, why are you bothering me with that? Have we got to go? No, we'll just get out then. Oh, all right. And then the bells went down, and then the pump got ordered on to Southwark Bridge, and then I was on the pump ladder. But basically, their brief was, it was so getting towards, by the time they were there, they were in the darkness. Basically, stand on the river with portable floodlights or whatever you've got. A lot of the people who had fallen over had gone in towards central London. Then the tide had changed, so there was a lot going on around the point of the operation off of Southwark Bridge, and I think our pump got ordered to go to Tower Bridge because the tide was now coming out, and they said all they were looking at were bits
bodies.
of broken. No, thankfully,
right.
Didn't see bodies because most of the bodies were picked out or still in the boat. Yeah. There were a lot of
people
boats
did drown though, didn't there?
Yeah, a lot of people. I can't remember the number.
That's a lot.
Forgive me, it was a big number, but most of them were on the boat.
Okay.
Those who went in the river had got mainly recovered because they'd gone downstream with the tide, and now they were coming upstream. But I remember the guys saying in the morning there was just debris floating, but coming past at such speed because of the speed of the tide.
Yeah.
And that's the thing with the Thames. The Thames really will just suck you down. It's a brutal river. Yeah,
it's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
You've written a book about a lot of your time. For people that are unfamiliar, where can they start learning a little bit more about it?
So my blog is stevedude68.com.
Mm-hmm.
So I've also just started off and I try and be really good with Twitter. I try and put a picture up with a little tiny anecdote from the story on my new Twitter account. So that is at London Fire Book. not London. So you can hashtag London Firefighter book, and that's the hashtag. But the actual account for the book itself, because it's only got a certain amount of words, is at London Fire Book.
Well, look, if people are listening to this, save me saying it wrong, you saying it wrong, we're going to put it in the notes anyway.
Yeah.
It'll be the exact description, the exact link will be in the notes below this. Steve, thank you for your time today, brother. Absolutely loved it. And I sincerely look forward to sitting again soon.
The Firefighters Podcast is a global podcast seeking to develop, inspire and motivate the world of the emergency services operators. Through a series of wide-ranging conversations celebrating those within our sector, we seek to encourage and support this incredible group of people. It's brought to you by myself, operational firefighter Pete Wakefield, and I speak with individuals from all walks of life who I sincerely believe can add value to or develop those who have chosen this life path. Please support your emergency services wherever you are in the world, and thank you for listening.